Chapter 17. Cat, Rat, and Dog. While Harry and the rest of Gryffindor House were euphoric over their win of the Quidditch Cup, a decidedly chilly pall had fallen over the Slytherin common room, most palpably when a member of their Quidditch team stepped into the room. Flint, far from being lauded for his efforts, was in contempt after running such a dirty game and earning so many penalties for the Gryffindors. Violet saw him fuming in the corner during the evenings, glaring at anyone who dared look in his direction. Malfoy had also been knocked down a peg. For all his pre-game boasting about crushing the Gryffindors and planning to knock Harry off of his broom, he too was in the doghouse for dirty playing and outright cheating. Unfortunately, even though the weather had picked up, Violet, Cass, and Tracy had little excuse for not being in the common room's oppressive atmosphere. As June approached, the days became cloudless and sultry, and all anybody felt like doing was strolling onto the grounds and flopping down on the grass with several pints of iced pumpkin juice, perhaps playing a casual game of gobstones or watching the giant squid propel itself dreamily across the surface of the lake. But they couldn't. Exams were nearly upon them, and instead of lazing around outside, the students were forced to remain inside the castle, trying to bully their brains into concentrating while dreaming of the open sky high above the thick stone walls of the dungeons. Cassius was beside himself. He was getting ready to take his OWLS ordinary wizarding levels, and was determined to get the highest marks he could in every subject. Violet and Tracy spent every moment they could studying for their own end-of-year exams together, shoulders hunched over their books, detailed notes shared between them. Violet was no longer avoiding Tracy. How could she, after realizing how much of a fool she'd been? "I really miss you," Tracy had sobbed, holding tightly to the sleeve of Violet's robe while Violet stared at her in shock. "I keep trying to be close to you, to show that it doesn't matter, but it's like you're running away from me. Violet, can't we still be friends?" "Can't things be like they've always been?" "Of course we can still be friends," Violet said, stunned. I thought you wouldn't want things to be that way anymore, after what I did. "I'm not mad that you kissed me, Violet," said Tracy in exasperation. Violet's face went bright red. "Is that what all this is about? I thought you were mad at me for not feeling the same." "I'm not mad either," Violet said. "I'd never be mad about something like that. I was just worried about making you uncomfortable. Are you uncomfortable around me?" Tracy demanded. Violet quickly shook her head. "Well, I'm not uncomfortable around you either, all right. The only one making it a problem is you, Roman 6. I just want my best friend back." Violet, shaken and embarrassed, had then thrown herself at Tracy, and the two had spent the better part of 10 minutes hugging one another, crying and apologizing over and over. Violet felt properly stupid. It was only after many assurances from Tracy that everything really was okay between them that she was able to calm down after that. Things between them had settled back to the way they were before the incident in Hogsmeade. "You two made up, then," Cassius remarked at lunch, noting the way Violet and Tracy were practically hanging off of another as they sat side by side. "I don't know what you're talking about," Tracy said loftily. She laced her fingers with Violet's beneath the table. "We were never fighting." Cass sighed heavily and grumbled what sounded suspiciously like girls under his breath, but that was that. It was a great comfort to have Tracy's warmth and company back. Violet hadn't even realized just how much she missed it all. Becoming close with Tracy again couldn't have come at a better time. Harry had received a note from Hagrid regarding Buckbeak's appeal. It was set for the 6th, which was the last day of the exams. Someone from the ministry would be coming to the castle, and so would an executioner. "That's sick," Tracy muttered, reading the note from Harry over Violet's shoulder. "How can they bring an executioner to an appeal? It's like they've already made up their minds." "They probably have," Cass said darkly. Violet had a horrible feeling that the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures had had its mind made up for it by Mr. Malfoy. Draco, who had been noticeably subdued since Gryffindor's triumph in the Quidditch final, seemed to regain some of his old swagger over the next few days. From sneering comments Violet overheard, Malfoy was certain Buckbeak was going to be killed and seemed thoroughly pleased with himself for bringing it about. It was all Violet could do to stop herself imitating Hermione and hitting Malfoy in the face on those occasions. She could not, however, be held responsible for his ink pot, exploding all over him in the common room one evening as he bragged to Crabbe and Goyle. Nor was she to blame for the picture frame that dislodged itself from the wall as he passed, very narrowly missing his head as it crashed to the ground. Those were just accidents, of course. Exam week began, and an unnatural hush fell over the castle. The third years emerged from Transfiguration at lunchtime on Monday, limp and ashen-faced, comparing results and bemoaning the difficulty of the tasks they had been set, which had included turning a teapot into a tortoise. Then, after a hasty lunch, it was straight back upstairs for the charms exam. Professor Flitwick's test on cheering charms would have been great fun if not for the number of students mucking it up. Tracy slightly overdid hers out of nerves, and Violet, who was partnering her, ended up in fits of hysterical laughter and had to be left in a quiet room for an hour before she was ready to perform the charm herself, her sides aching from all the compulsive laughter. After dinner, the students hurried back to their common rooms, not to relax, but to start studying for care of magical creatures, potions, and astronomy. Hagrid presided over the care of magical creatures exam the following morning with a very preoccupied air indeed. His heart didn't seem to be in it at all. He had provided a large tub of fresh flobberworms for the class and told them that to pass the test, their flobberworms had to still be alive at the end of 1 hour. As flobberworms flourished best if left to their own devices, it was the easiest exam any of them had ever taken, and also gave plenty of opportunity to speak to Hagrid. "Beaky's gettin' a bit depressed," Hagrid told them, bending low on the pretense of checking that Harry's flobberworm was still alive. "Been cooped up too long, but still. We'll know day after tomorrow one way or the other." They had potions that afternoon, which was another exam that Violet breezed through without difficulty. The confusing concoction that Professor Snape had set for them was the very first potion he had walked Violet through at the beginning of her private lessons. She knew it backward and forward, and swelled with pride when Snape, standing watch over the rest of the struggling class with an air of vindictive pleasure, had stopped beside her long enough to give a small nod and let Violet catch a glimpse of his notes, where she had been given full marks. Then came astronomy at midnight, up on the tallest tower. History of Magic on Wednesday morning, in which Harry and Violet scribbled everything Florian Fortescue had ever told them about medieval witch hunts, while wishing they could have had one of Fortescue's choconut sundaes with them in the stifling classroom. Wednesday afternoon meant herbology. In the greenhouses under the baking hot sun, Tracy had to save Violet from getting stinksap all over herself. Then back to the common room once more, with sunburnt necks, thinking longingly of this time the next day when it would all be over. Violet had 3 exams the next day, while Tracy only had 2. Thursday morning started with defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin had compiled the most unusual exam any of them had ever taken, a sort of obstacle course outside in the sun, where they had to wade across a deep paddling pool containing a grindylow, cross a series of potholes full of red caps, squish their way across a patch of marsh while ignoring misleading directions from a hinkapunk, then climb into an old trunk and battle with a new boggart. "Well done, Violet," Lupin muttered as Violet climbed out of the trunk, shaking slightly but still grinning. "Full marks." Flushed with her success, Violet hung around to watch Tracy and Harry. Harry breezed through the course as well, even faster than she did, and came to stand beside Violet with a matching grin of triumph. Tracy did very well with everything except the grindylow, which grabbed hold of her ankle and managed to drag her beneath the water before she was able to break its hold. She completed the rest of the course soaking wet and made a beeline for the common room once she was done to deal with her hair. Violet followed behind, trying to convince her that it didn't look that bad, but her attention was diverted by the sight that met them at the top of the steps. Cornelius Fudge, sweating slightly in his pinstriped cloak, was standing there staring out at the grounds. He started at the sight of Violet. "Hello there, Violet," he said. "Just had an exam, I expect. Nearly finished." "Yes, sir," said Violet. Tracy, already flustered and not on speaking terms with the Minister of Magic, hovered awkwardly in the background. Violet took hold of her hand and pulled her forward. Tracy, this is Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic." "Minister, this my friend, Tracy Davis." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Davis," said Fudge politely, shaking Tracy's damp hand. "Very good to see you with friends, Violet, very good indeed. And your brother, Harry, is he around as well?" "He should be nearly done with his exam, too," Violet said. "He should be along." "Good, good. Perhaps I'll run into him as well." "Well, best hurry along, girls. Don't hold up on my account." Violet, who knew when she was being dismissed, nodded politely and pulled Tracy into the entrance hall with her. Tracy elbowed her hard in the ribs. "That was the minister," she hissed angrily as they headed down the stairs toward the dungeons. "How could you let me talk to the Minister of Magic while I look like this?" "What's he even doing here?" Violet mused. "Today is Buckbeak's appeal, but surely he's not here just for that." Tracy had plenty of time to make herself presentable. She had a whole hour until her last exam, Muggle Studies, but Violet had to rush off after lunch to her Ancient Runes test, which focused entirely on the Elder Futhark alphabet. Violet's very last exam, however, was arithmancy, and for once she was looking forward to the class. Armed with the new knowledge of her own middle name, Violet sat down and put quill to parchment with absolute confidence. She smiled as she handed it to the Professor Vector and skipped off down to the dungeons to relax until dinner time. It was a delicious meal, as always, but Violet barely enjoyed it as she sat by herself at the Slytherin table. Cass, exhausted from a full week of rigorous OW. LS staggered through the common room without so much turning his head toward Violet's greeting and headed straight to the boys' dormitory, where he presumably collapsed face first into bed. As for Tracy, although the afternoon she'd suffered a terrible itch on her ankle, which turned out to be where the grinderlow had sunk its pointed little teeth into her flesh during the defense against the dark arts exam. As the itch was only getting worse, and a rash was starting to spread down her foot, Tracy had gone to the hospital wing to have it looked at by Madame Pomfrey. Violet couldn't finish the plate of food in front of her. She left the great hall early with the thought to find out if Tracy was all right, but her feet were carrying her in a different direction. Violet found herself outside the closed door of Professor Lupin's office and knocked. "Come in, Violet," a tired voice called from within. Professor Lupin was sitting behind his desk, a mound of parchment in front of him, and he smiled warmly when Violet poked her head into the office. "How'd you know it was me?" "Lucky guess. I don't get many visitors." "What can I do for you?" "Have you got any more of that butterbeer, sir?" Violet asked as she stepped inside. "I have, as a matter of fact," Lupin said, straightening up. "Only 2 bottles left, I'm afraid, but I suppose that's enough for the 2 of us." "Come on and sit down, Violet. I expect you're more tired than I am." Violet flopped heavily into the chair in front of Professor Lupin's desk and gratefully accepted the bottle of foamy golden liquid he passed to her. "Cheers," she said. "Cheers," Lupin repeated. There was the sound of glass clinking together, the hiss of the bottle caps being opened, and twin hums of satisfaction and buttery refreshment. Professor Lupin sat back in his chair and propped his feet up on the desk. He let his head fall back with a sigh. "You know, when I was a student, I used to believe that teachers enjoyed setting exams to torture us. Now, as a teacher, I'm realizing that it must have been just as torturous for them as well. I think we students still have the worst of it," Violet grinned. "You didn't have waded through a bog today." "No, but I did have to set up the bog and the wading pool and stop the red caps from bludgeoning each other to death, and that wasp before me students showed up." Lupin was smiling, but there was a definitely weariness in his voice. "And on top of it all, I have to see that all these grades are properly sorted before the end of the year. Not that I'm complaining, mind you. It's very rewarding work. Lupin took another sip of his butterbeer, eyes gleaming over the rim of the bottle. You really did very well today, Violet, he said, and Violet glowed. You and Harry are sitting right at the top of the class. I'm very, very impressed with you both. Do I get extra points for being your goddaughter? Violet asked boldly, and Lupin laughed. I don't know that I'm willing to stoop to that level of blatant favoritism just yet in my teaching career. Perhaps by the time you start your OWLS, I'll have softened up a bit. I'll hold you to that, said Violet. We Slytherins have long memories, you know. Professor Lupin grimaced. Yes, so I've heard. He took another small sip. I'll admit, Violet, I was very surprised when I first learned you'd been sorted into Slytherin. James would have quite the shock too if he'd known. Violet's stomach did a funny sort of flip. Would he be angry about it? Not angry, of course not, Lupin said quickly. But he was a Gryffindor through and very proud of that fact. I expect he would hope you and Harry would follow in his footsteps. So he wouldn't like that I'm in Slytherin, Violet said quietly. Lupin took his feet off the desk and sat forward. He reached out and took Violet's hand. Violet, he said seriously, waiting until she met and held his gaze. Your father would have loved you with all his heart, even if the only clothes you owned were grey and green, and if you got a snake tattooed on your forehead. He might have fussed, he might have demanded the sorting hat be looked at for tampering, but hellivered you with all his heart. Please don't ever doubt that. Violet stared down at where Lupin's hand was lightly grasping hers. He was now the fourth person in her entire life to ever hold her hand. Harry, Tracy, Ginny, and now Professor Lupin. That wasn't a lot of people, a privileged list. Violet chose to think of them as. But there was something else that caught her attention on the desk. Tucked beneath a stack of rolled-up essays, Violet caught sight of a very familiar, very old corner of parchment, the Marauder's map. Hey, she said, pulling her hand free and tugging the map from its hiding place. What are you doing with this out? I thought you were grading papers. Ah, well, Professor Lupin deftly plucked the map from Violet's grasp, holding it close to his chest across the desk. About that, Violet narrowed her eyes. Thatcher, you knew it was me at the door, isn't it? Have you been spying on me? Keeping an eye on is the phrase I would prefer. Thank you, Lupin said, wincing. For as much trouble as I got into with that map, I realized how useful it could be in keeping you and your brother out of trouble. That's not fair, Violet frowned. How are we supposed to get any privacy with you watching our every move? Violet, please, it's hardly like that. I don't watch you at all hours of the day. That would be deplorable. I've peeked at your whereabouts on occasion, when I thought there was a chance for either of you to be in places you shouldn't. What does that mean? It means, Lupin said slowly, smoothing the map out on the desk in front of him, that the pair of you have a habit of running off and making rash decisions. Tonight, I feared one or both you might try to leave the castle to visit Hagrid. I understand his hippogriff is facing execution. Violet's mouth fell open. In the rush of the exams, she'd completely forgotten about Hagrid and Buckbeak's appeal. I forgot. I should have gone to him. That's exactly what I was afraid of, Professor Lupin said grimly. He peered down at the map before him, scanning the hundreds of minuscule darts moving across its surface. He sighed heavily and pointed to the corner, out on the grounds. See here, this is what I was worried about. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are all at Hagrid's hut right at this moment, in the garden. I suppose they've had the sense to use James's cloak, at the very least. You know about the invisibility cloak, Violet said, surprised, though she really shouldn't be. Lupin flashed her a small smile. Your father did an admirable job of trying to keep it secret, but yes, I'm afraid I did no arb about. Professor Lupin went silent, staring down at the map in front of him. His face had gone completely white. Violet, alarmed, stood up. Sir, are you all right? Lupin didn't answer. He stared, transfixed, at the corner of the Marauder's map where Hagrid's hut was drawn. It's not possible, he murmured faintly. It's not possible. What's going on? Violet demanded, coming around the side of the desk. Lupin stood abruptly, both hands flat on the desk as he watched the page. Violet heard the breath catch in his throat. She placed a tentative hand on his shoulder. "Professor Lupin." "Oh, God." Lupin was trembling, eyes wide, his face and hands white as milk. He straightened up and turned so quickly that Violet was knocked away from him, stumbling backward a few steps. She fumbled as he pressed the Marauder's map into her hands. Professor Lupin seized her by the shoulders. "Go to Dumbledore," he said, more serious than she had ever heard him before. His eyes were wide and wild. "Violet, can you do that? Go straight to Professor Dumbledore and show him that map." "Okay," Violet said, frightened not by Lupin, but by whatever had made him react this way. "Please, sir, what's going?" But at her word, Lupin had released her and dashed across his office. He yanked the door open so hard the hinges squealed, and then he was gone. The sound of his frantic footfalls pounding on the pavement disappeared into silence. Violet was left shaking and alone in Professor Lupin's office, holding the Marauder's map in her hands. She looked down at it. At first, she wasn't sure what she was meant to be seeing. She watched the little dart that was Professor Lupin moving at a rapid pace down the grand staircase, and saw her own dart standing unmoving in his office. Looking at Hagrid's hut, she saw no sign of her brother or his friends. Only Hagrid and three other little darts labelled Albus Dumbledore, Cornelius Fudge, and Walden Macnair standing inside of Hagrid's hut. Harry couldn't have gone far, she reasoned, and began to scan the expanse of the grounds for his little dart. When she finally found it, her heart stopped in her chest. Harry and Hermione were moving quickly toward the Whomping Willow. There were three more darts near them, much closer to the murderous old tree, and only one of them, Ronald Weasley, was familiar. It was the others, right on top of Ron, that chilled Violet to the very bone, Peter Pettigrew and Sirius Black. Not possible, Lupin had said, and how could it be? Peter Pettigrew was dead. Black had killed him 12 years ago. Black, who was moving very quickly under the image of the Whomping Willow, right into the secret passage hidden beneath its roots. Ron was moving right along with him, and Violet got the sickening impression that he was being dragged. She watched, horrified, as the three darts of Ron, Black, and Pettigrew disappeared off the map entirely. They had left the Hogwarts grounds, and Harry and Hermione were going after them. Violet turned on her heel and rushed to the door of Lupin's office. She stepped outside, turned to race after Professor Lupin, and collided bodily with Professor Snape. "Mind where you're going," he snarled, staggering to keep his balance, and to keep hold of the goblet of wolfsbane potion he was carrying. His expression turned from annoyance to suspicion as he looked at Violet. "Are you ill, Potter? You look as though you plan to faint." "Sirius Black's on the castle grounds," Violet told him, her words coming out in a rush. "He was on the map, but he's gone now he's got Ron, and Harry's going after him." Lupin ran off, "but he won't make it." Snape's eyes widened. "What are you talking about, Potter?" he demanded. "What map?" Violet shoved the Marauder's map under his nose and pointed. He looked down just in time to see Harry and Hermione's little darts vanish as well. Even sprinting out of the castle, Professor Lupin would hardly make it to them in time. Snape snatched the map from her hands and studied it for a moment, black eyes darting rapidly over the worn parchment. Then he tucked it into his robes and grabbed Violet by the arm. "Stay here," Professor Snape ordered, dragging her back inside Lupin's office. "Do you hear me, Potter? You will stay in this room if you value your life, do you understand?" Snape's grip on her arm was vice-like. The cold fury on his face was like nothing Violet had ever seen, and nothing she ever wanted to see again. He shook her roughly. "Do you understand?" "Why, yes, sir," Violet squeaked. Professor Snape let her go at once, placed the smoking goblet on Professor Lupin's desk, and rushed from the office in a swirl of black robes. The door slammed shut behind him. Violet immediately rushed to it and tried the handle. It was locked. Snape had locked her in, and Harry was out there with Sirius Black, and Lupin wasn't running fast enough, and her brother was going toe-deaf. She couldn't get out of this room and make it to him. Violet yanked frantically on the doorknob. twisting it back and forth, looking desperately for some sort of give. She raced back to Lupin's desk to look for a paperclip or a letter opener, anything that she could jam in the lock and try to jimmy it open the way Fred and George had taught her. She'd yanked open and ransacked 3 drawers before remember that she was a witch. Alohomora! The door sprang open, and Violet sprinted down the hallway after Professor Snape. She didn't catch sight of him until she left the castle, heart hammering in her chest. Snape was running toward the Whomping Willow, wand out, and Violet tore after him. Snape came a sudden halt, and Violet was forced to skid to a stop as well, ducking quickly behind a brush so he wouldn't see her following him. But Professor Snape wasn't looking behind him. His attention was on the ground, on something at his feet. Violet watched, panting, as he stooped and picked up what looked to be a large blanket. He shook it out, and it shimmered in the moonlight, and Violet realized with a lurch what it was: Harry's invisibility cloak. He must have dropped it in the chase, or else had it ripped off of him. Whatever had happened, it was in Snape's hands now, and Violet could do nothing but watch as Professor Snape threw the cloak over his shoulders and vanished beneath it. No longer able to see him, Violet had no way of knowing how far back she should keep to avoid detection. She waited several long, breathless seconds before creeping out from behind the bush and starting off toward the Whomping Willow again. She froze when a pale, disembodied hand appeared in the air 30 feet ahead of her. The hand reached down and lifted a fallen branch from the ground, then jabbed it forward against the knotted roots. The great tree, which had been slowly, almost sluggishly whipping its branches through the air, fell completely still. The stick fell to the ground, and the arm disappeared back into thin air. Violet held her breath, counted to 10, and headed straight toward the base of the tree. As she drew closer, a small opening became visible among the roots, just large enough for a person to climb through. This was the entrance to the tunnel beneath the Whomping Willow, which Fred and George said led out to somewhere in Hogsmeade. As terrified as she was determined, Violet took a deep, shuddering breath, tightened her grip on the handle of her wand, and headed into the hole. She had to nearly crawl to get inside, and the ceiling was so low that she was forced to bend almost double as she moved forward. This was far worse than the tunnel leading into the cellar of Honeydukes, and this time there was no Harry for her to cling to for guidance or support. It was only Violet, by herself in complete darkness. There was no sign of Professor Snape ahead of her, and she couldn't risk lighting her wand. She would have to proceed by touch along the passageway. On and on it went. It felt at least as long as the one to Honeydukes. Violet pushed away the thoughts of the walls closing in around her, the low ceiling collapsing and leaving her trapped underground. She forced herself to think of Harry and of Ron and of what Sirius Black might be doing to them. She was drawing breath in sharp, painful gasps, her legs aching from running at a crouch. And then the tunnel began to rise. Moments later it twisted, and a patch of dim light shone through a small opening. Violet, gasping for breath, rushed towards it. Pulling herself out of the hole, Violet found herself into a very disordered, very dusty room. Paper was peeling from the walls. There were stains all over the floor. Every piece of furniture was broken, as though somebody had smashed it. The windows were all boarded up. She looked around carefully. The room was deserted, but a door to the right stood open, leading to a shadow hallway. Violet swallowed and took a step toward there. There was a rustling sound to her left, and suddenly a hand closed over her mouth. "Stupid girl," hissed the furious, familiar voice of Professor Snape. Violet clawed at his hand, but a moment later found herself pulled against him, shrouded beneath the invisibility cloak that had just been yanked over her head. "Theanettime, you failed to obey my instructions," Snape's whisper broke off abruptly. There was a creak overhead, followed by muffled voices. Someone was upstairs. Several someones, judging by the sound of it. Professor Snape's fingers tightened over Violet's mouth. "Do not make a sound," he breathed warningly. "Keep close to me." Violet nodded shakily, as much as she could, and Snape slowly released his hold on her face. Instead, he took hold of the back of her robes and guided her, slowly and quietly, into the hall and up the crumbling staircase. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust except the floor, where 3 sets of footprints and a wide, shiny stripe cut through the grime and led straight into one of the rooms. The voices were coming from inside, and Violet immediately recognized one of them as Professor Lupin's. Ministry never knew there used to be 3 unregistered animagi running around Hogwarts. "If you're going to tell them the story, get a move on, Remus," snarled a new voice, terrible and low and ragged. It turned Violet's blood to ice in her veins and froze her in place. She felt Professor Snape stiffen behind her and heard him let out a small, sharp gasp. "I've waited 12 years. I'm not going to wait much longer." "All right, but you'll need to help me, Sirius," said Lupin, and Violet couldn't believe what she was hearing. Sirius Black, helping Professor Lupin. "I only know how it began." Snape's fist pressed painfully into Violet's back, urging her forward, and she had no choice but to push the door open and walk straight into the room. They entered into a ruined, dusty old bedroom. Violet took in the scene with wide, bewildered eyes. Ron was half-slumped on a magnificent 4-poster bed with dusty hangings, his legs sprawled at an odd angle, and his face white with pain and fear. Harry and Hermione stood beside him with their wands out, though lowered. Ron was not holding his wand. He had clutched in both hands, inexplicably, Scabbers the rat, alive and well. Professor Lupin was standing in the middle of the room, next to a figure that was barely a man dressed in rags with long, matted, filthy hair, half covering his sunken, skeletal face. The same face that Violet had seen staring back at her from the television screen in the Dursleys' kitchen and on the front page of Thedley Prophet, Sirius Black. And there, laying on the bed in between it all, was Crookshanks. Black and Lupin wheeled around as Violet pushed the bedroom door open and she froze, forgetting that they couldn't see her. Professor Snape yanked her quickly to the side, away from the door, just as Professor Lupin came toward them. "No one is there," he said, looking out into the landing. "This place is haunted," said Ron. "It's not," said Lupin, still looking at the door. "The Shrieking Shack was never haunted. The screams and howls the villagers used to hear were made by me." He pushed his graying hair out of his eyes, thought for a moment, then said, "That's where all of this starts with my becoming a werewolf. None of this could have happened if I hadn't been bitten. And if I hadn't been so foolhardy." Violet stared at him with wide eyes. No one else in the room reacted to his statement, which meant his secret must have been revealed before she and Snape arrived. Lupin looked sober and tired, and Violet's heart ached for him. "I was a very small boy when I received the bite. My parents tried everything, but of course there is no cure. The potion that Professor Snape has been making for me is a very recent discovery. It keeps me safe, you see. As long as I take it in the week preceding the full moon, I keep my mind when I transform. I am able to curl up in my office, a harmless creature, and wait for the moon to wane again." A pained expression flickered over his face. "Before the wolfsbane potion was discovered, however, I became a fully fledged monster once a month. It seemed impossible that I would be able to come to Hogwarts. Other parents weren't likely to want their children exposed to me. But then Dumbledore became headmaster, and he was sympathetic. He said that as long as we took certain precautions, there was no reason I shouldn't come to school." Lupin sighed and looked directly at Harry. "I told you, months ago, that the Whomping Willow was planted the year I came to Hogwarts. The truth is that it was planted Becasay came to Hogwarts. This house," Lupin looked miserably around the room, "the tunnel that leads to it, they were built for my use. Once a month, I was smuggled out of the castle into this place to transform. The tree was placed at the tunnel mouth to stop anyone coming across me while I was dangerous." Violet didn't understand the context of this explanation or why it was happening now, while Sirius Black was standing right there in the room, but she listened raptly all the same. The only sound apart from Lupin's voice was Scabbers' frightened squeaking. "My transformations in those days were terrible. It is very painful to turn into a werewolf. I was separated from humans to bite, so I bit and scratched myself instead. The villagers heard the noise and the screaming and thought they were hearing particularly violent spirits. Dumbledore encouraged the rumor. Even now, when the house has been silent for years, the villagers don't dare approach it. But apart from my transformations, I was happier than I had ever been in my life. For the first time ever, I had friends, 3 great friends, Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and of course your father, Harry James Potter. Now, my 3 friends could hardly fail to notice that I disappeared once a month. I made up all sorts of stories. I told them my mother was ill and that I had to go home and see her. I was terrified they would desert me the moment they found out what I was. But of course, they, like you, Hermione, worked out the truth. Violet looked quickly at Hermione. She was staring intently at Lupin, eyes wide and expression hard. So she was the one who had revealed Professor Lupin's secret to the others. And they didn't desert me at all, Lupin continued, sounding slightly breathless. Instead, they did something for me that would make my transformations not only bearable, but the best times of my life. They became animagi. Violet gasped softly and felt Professor Snape's grip tighten dangerously on the back of her robes. My dad, too, said Harry, astounded. Yes, indeed, said Lupin. It took them the best part of 3 years to work out how to do it. Your father and Sirius here were the cleverest students in the school, and lucky they were, because animagus transformations can go horribly wrong. One reason, the Ministry keeps a close watch on those attempting to do it. Peter needed all the help he could get from James and Sirius. Finally, in our 5th year, they managed it. They could each turn into a different animal at will. But how did that help you? Said Hermione, voicing the question that Violet dare not. They couldn't keep me company as humans, so they kept me company as animals, said Lupin. A werewolf is only a danger to people. They snuck out of the castle every month under James's invisibility cloak. They transformed. Peter, as the smallest, could slip beneath the willows attacking branches and touch the knot that freezes it. They would then slip down the tunnel and join me. Under their influence, I became less dangerous. My body was still monstrous, but my mind seemed to become less so while I was with them. Hurry up, Remus, snarled Black, who was staring across the room at Ron with a horrible sort of hunger on his face. Violet flinched at the sound of his terrible, rasping voice and earned another warning yank from Professor Snape. I'm getting there, Sirius. I'm getting there. Well, highly exciting possibilities were open to us now that we could all transform. Soon we were leaving the Shrieking Shack and roaming the school grounds and the village by night. Sirius and James transformed into such large animals, they were able to keep a werewolf in check. I doubt whether any Hogwarts students ever found out more about the Hogwarts grounds and Hogsmeade than we did. And that's how we came to write the Marauders map and sign it with our nicknames. Sirius is Padfoot, Peter is Wormtail, James was Prongs, and your Moony, Violet thought, pained. Lupin had already told her about the nicknames, but not the significance of them. She still didn't understand what the point of all this was. What sort of animal? Harry began, but Hermione cut him off. That was still really dangerous. Running around in the dark with a werewolf. What if you'd given the others the slip and bitten somebody? A thought that still haunts me, said Professor Lupin heavily. And there were near misses, many of them. We laughed about them afterwards. We were young, thoughtless, carried away with our own cleverness. I sometimes felt guilty about betraying Dumbledore's trust, of course. He had admitted me to Hogwarts when no other headmaster would have done so, and he had no idea I was breaking the rules he had set down my own and others' safety. He never knew I had led 3 fellow students into becoming animagi illegally, but I always managed to forget my guilty feelings every time we sat down to plan our next month's adventures, and I haven't changed. Lupin's face had hardened, and there was self-disgust in his voice. All this year, I have been battling with myself, wondering whether I should tell Dumbledore that Sirius was an animagus, but I didn't do it. Why? Because I was too cowardly. It would have meant admitting that I'd betrayed his trust while I was at school, admitting that I'd led others along with me. And Dumbledore's trust has meant everything to me. He let me into Hogwarts as a boy, and he gave me a job when I have been shunned all my adult life, unable to find paid work because of what I am. And so I convinced myself that Sirius was getting into the school using dark arts he had learned from Voldemort, that being an animagus had nothing to do with it. So in a way, Severus has been right about me all along. Behind her, Violet felt Professor Snape's body go rigid. He held his breath. "Snape," said Black harshly, taking his eyes off Ron for the first time in minutes and looking up at Lupin. "What's Snape got to do with it?" "He's here, Sirius," said Lupin heavily, and Snape's fist trembled against Violet's spine. "He's teaching here as well." He looked at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Professor Snape was at school with us. He fought very hard against my appointment to the Defense Against the Dark Arts job. He has been telling Dumbledore all year that I am not to be trusted. He has his reasons. You see, Sirius here played a trick on him which nearly killed him, a trick which involved me." Black made a derisive noise. "It served him right," he sneered. "Sneaking around, trying to find out what we were up to, hoping he could get us expelled." "It was wrong, Sirius, and you know it," said Lupin sharply. Black stared at him, and with effort he turned back to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Severus was very interested in where I went every month," Lupin told them. "We were in the same year, you know, and we didn't get along very well. He especially disliked James. Jealousy was part of it, I think, of James's talent on the Quidditch field. But Merlin knows James went out of his way to make himself unlikable to Severus. Anyway, Snape had seen me crossing the grounds with Madame Pomfrey one evening as she led me toward the Whomping Willow to transform. Sirius thought it would be amusing to tell Severus all he had to do was prod the knot on the tree trunk with a long stick, and he'd be able to get in after me. Well, of course, Severus tried it if he'd gotten as far as this house. He'd have met a fully grown werewolf, but your father, who'd heard what Sirius had done, went after Severus and pulled him back, at great risk to his own life. Severus glimpsed me, though, at the end of the tunnel. He was forbidden by Dumbledore to tell anybody, but from that time on he knew what I was. Beneath the cloak, Violet could feel Professor Snape shaking. His hold on her robes was so tight he was nearly choking her, and she could hear his shallow, rapid breaths in her ear. Violet felt him shifting, but couldn't turn to see what he was going. "So that's why Snape doesn't like you," said Harry slowly, "because he thought you were in on the joke." "That's right," sneered Snape suddenly, finally letting go of Violet's robes. He reached up and pulled the invisibility cloak off of them both, and raised his wand, pointing it directly at Professor Lupin. Chapter 18. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Hermione screamed. Black leapt to his feet. Harry was staring at Violet as though he just had a bucket of ice water thrown over him. "I found this at the base of Whomping Willow," said Professor Snape, throwing the cloak aside, careful to keep his wand pointing directly at Lupin's chest. "Very useful, Potter, I thank you." Snape was slightly breathless, but his face was full of suppressed triumph. "You're wondering, perhaps, how I knew you were here," he said, his eyes glittering. His fingers closed tightly around Violet's upper arm. "I've just been to your office, Lupin. You forgot take your potion tonight, so I took a gobletful along. And very lucky I did. Lucky for me, I mean. Who should I run into but Miss Potter here, blabbering about you running off after Sirius Black after spotting him on a certain map. One glance at it told me all I needed to know. I saw you running along this passageway and out of sight." "Severus," Lupin began, but Professor Snape overrode him. "I've told the headmaster again and again that you're helping your old friend Black into the castle, Lupin, and here's the proof. Not even I dreamed you would have the nerve to use this old place as your hideout." "Severus, you're making a mistake," said Lupin urgently. "You haven't heard everything I can explain. Sirius is not here to kill Harry. 2 more for Azkaban tonight," said Snape, a frantic edge to his voice. Violet squirmed in his vice-like grip, his thin fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "I shall be interested to see how Dumbledore takes this. He was quite convinced you were harmless, you know, Lupin. Ademwerwolf, you fool, said Lupin softly. Is a schoolboy grudge worth putting an innocent man back inside Azkaban? Bang. Thin, snake-like cords burst from the end of Snape's wand and twisted themselves around Lupin's mouth, wrists, and ankles. He overbalanced and fell to the floor, unable to move. Violet screamed, and with a roar of rage, Black started towards Snape, but Snape pointed his wand straight between Black's eyes. He jerked Violet roughly to the side, out of the way. "Give me a reason," Snape whispered. "Give me a reason to do it, and I swear I will." Black stopped dead. Violet, hurting and furious, twisted in Snape's grasp and elbowed him in the stomach as hard as she could. "Oof," he huffed, doubling over, scrabbling to keep a hold of her, but not quickly enough. Violet grabbed hold of Snape's wand and yanked it out of his hand. She danced out of his reach as he gasped for air and gripped his wand in both hands. "Stay back," she shouted, backing toward where Harry was standing. "Stay back, or I'll snap it." The whole room froze. Professor Lupin lay bound and helpless on the floor at Violet's feet. Sirius Black was staring at her with shocked, sunken eyes. Professor Snape, regaining his composure and clutching his stomach, was looking at Violet with barely contained rage in his black eyes. "You foolish girl," he gasped, straightening slowly. "You're meddling in what you don't understand. You're right, I didn't understand," Violet said loudly. She fumbled to pull her own wand out of her pocket, quickly aiming it at Black. "I don't understand anything that's going on here, and if somebody doesn't start explaining soon I'll..." Flustered and panicked, Violet lowered her wand to Lupin and said, "Finite incantatum." The ropes around him burst apart and crumbled into ash. Professor Lupin climbed quickly to his feet, rubbing his wrists from where the bindings had cut into them. "Thank you, Violet," he said. He reached for her, and Violet aimed her wand straight at his chest. Lupin's hands raised warily. "Harry," Violet said, not taking her eyes off the three grown men in front of her, "are you all right? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Harry said at once, appearing beside her. "I'm okay, Roman 6, but Ron's leg is broken. Black dragged him in here." "Tell me what's going on, Harry," Violet said shakily. Lupin was staring impassively back at her, but both Black and Snape's faces were twisted with emotion. "I heard everything about the animagi and running around as animals. What happened before that? Why is my cat here?" "What ish," she swiveled her wand to Sirius Black, "doing here?" "This isn't what it looks like, Violet," Lupin said quickly. "Sirius is not here to—" "I didn't ask you," Violet cried, aiming Professor Snape's wand at him with her offhand. She was terribly outnumbered. Any of them could charge her, knock her off her feet, take her wand, and Harry, she repeated, "Tell me what's going on." "Black thinks Scabbers is Peter Pettigrew," Harry said at once. "Age. He's been trying to get at him since we got here." Lupin said they switched. Something. I don't know. Black wants to kill Scabbers. But Lupin said he had to explain why first, that we had a right to know Roman 6. It's nonsense. "Pettigrew is dead," heckled him. Violet glanced over her shoulder at Ron on the bed, holding onto a frantic Scabbers with both hands. The rat was skinnier than ever, missing patches of fur down his little body, his tail writhing desperately as he fought to escape. A light bulb went off in Violet's head. "Wormtail," she said softly, sliding her eyes back to Professor Lupin. "That's why he was called Wormtail, because he's a arat," rasped Sirius Black, his eyes fixed once again on Ron, not on Ron, but on the squirming creature in his hands. "A filthy little rat." Harry put a hand on Violet's shoulder. "Violet, he's mad. Pettigrew's dead. There were witnesses." "I saw him on the map," Violet said. "I watched Black pull Ron under the Whomping Willow after Lupin ran off. Pettigrew was with him." "Peter Pettigrew was right there with him, Harry." Harry's mouth was hanging open. Violet took a step forward and pressed Snape's wand into the hand of a stunned Professor Lupin and said, "Prove it." "Finally," growled Sirius Black, taking a step forward. "Finally, it's about time. Have you lost your senses, girl?" snarled Professor Snape, stepping forward as well, only for Lupin to turn his own wand against him. Snape's black eyes were full of hatred for him, such as Violet had never seen. You would believe the lies of a werewolf over listening to sense. I trust him, Violet said, turning her wand on Professor Snape as well. I'm sorry for hitting you, sir, I really am, but my parents are dead because of someone in this room, and I want to know we. So do I, said Black, advancing on Ron with outstretched hands. You boy give me Peter. Now. Ron clutched Scabbers closer to his chest. Come off it, he said weakly. Are you saying he broke out of Azkaban just to get his hands on Scabbers? I mean. He looked up at Harry and Hermione for support. Okay, so Pettigrew could turn into a rat. There are millions of rats. How's he supposed to know which one's which after he was locked up in Azkaban? You know, Sirius, that's a fair question, said Lupin, looking at Black and frowning slightly. How did you find out where he was? Black put one of his claw-like hands inside his robes and took out a crumpled piece of paper, which he smoothed flat and held out to show the others. It was the photograph of Ron and his family that had appeared in Thedily Prophet the previous summer, and there, on Ron's shoulder, was Scabbers. How did you get this? Lupin asked Black, thunderstruck. Fudge, said Black. When he came to inspect Azkaban last year, he gave me his paper. And there was Peter on the front page, on this boy's shoulder. I knew him at once. How many times had I seen him transform? And the caption said the boy would be going back to Hogwarts, to where Harry was. My God, said Lupin softly, staring from Scabbers to the picture in the paper and back again. His front paw. What about it? Said Ron defiantly. He's got a toe missing, said Black. So the rat is missing a toe, snapped Snape, fists clenched furiously at his sides. Is that proof enough for you, Potter? Perhaps we should inspect the creature's ears as well before ending this farce. Be quiet, Severus, please, for once in your life, said Lupin tiredly. He stared back at Scabbers. So simple, so brilliant. He cut it off himself. Just before he transformed, said Black. When I cornered him, he yelled for the whole street to hear that I'd betrayed Lily and James. Then, before I could curse him, he blew apart the street with the wand behind his back, killed everything within 20 feet of himself, and sped down into the sewer with the other rats. A finger, Violet said numbly, looking up at Lupin. All they ever found of Pettigrew was his finger. Look, Scabbers probably had a fight with another rat or something, said Ron desperately. He's been in my family for ages, right? 12 years, in fact, said Lupin. Didn't you ever wonder why he was living so long? We've been taking good care of him, said Ron. Not looking too good at the moment, though, is he? Said Professor Lupin. I'd guess he's been losing weight ever since he heard Sirius was on the loose again. He's been scared of that mad cat, said Ron, nodding toward Crookshanks, who was still inexplicably purring on the bed. But that wasn't right, Violet thought suddenly. Crookshanks had been after Scabbers for years, and yet Scabbers had always remained just as fat and sleepy as always. It wasn't until Ron's return from Egypt, since the time when Black had escaped. This cat isn't mad, said Black hoarsely. He reached out a bony hand and stroked Crookshanks' fluffy head. He's the most intelligent of his kind I've ever met. He recognized Peter for what he was right away. And when he met me, he knew I was no dog. It was a while before he trusted me. Finally, I managed to communicate to him what I was after, and he's been helping me. What do you mean? Breathed Violet, staring wide-eyed at Crookshanks. Crookshanks, what you've been helping Sirius Black. Crookshanks blinked his orange eyes at Violet and lowered his head, looking, as much as a cat could, apologetic. He tried to bring Peter to me, but couldn't, Black said. So he stole the passwords into Gryffindor Tower for me. As I understand it, he took them from a boy's bedside table. Violet gaped at Crookshanks, feeling a mix of awe and pride. It was absurd, and yet... But Peter got wind of what was going on and ran for it. Croaked Black. This cat Crookshanks, did you call him? Told me Peter had left blood on the sheets. I supposed he bit himself. Well, faking his own death had worked once. The words seemed to jolt Harry back to the present. And why did he fake his death? He said furiously. Because he knew you were about to kill him like you killed our parents. No, said Lupin, Harry, and now you've come to finish him off. Yes, I have, said Black with an evil look at Scabbers. Then you should have let Snape take him, Harry shouted, rounding on Violet. Harry, said Lupin hurriedly, don't you see? All this time we've thought Sirius betrayed your parents, and Peter tracked him down, but it was the other way around, don't you see? Peter betrayed your mother and Father Sirius tracked Peter down. That's not true, Harry yelled. He was their secret keeper. He said so before you turned up. He said he killed them. He was pointing to Black, and Violet's eyes went wide. Had she been wrong? Had she misplaced her trust after all? But Black was shaking his head. The sunken eyes were suddenly overbright. Harry. I as good as killed them, Black croaked. I persuaded Lily and James to change to Peter at the last moment, persuaded them to use him as secret keeper instead of me. I'm to blame, I know it. The night they died, I'd arranged to check on Peter, make sure he was still safe, but when I arrived at his hiding place, he'd gone. Yet there was no sign of a struggle. It didn't feel right. I was scared. I set out for your parents' house straight away. And when I saw their house destroyed and their bodies, I realized what Peter must have done. What I'd done. His voice broke. He turned away. Lies, hissed Professor Snape. His eyes were slits of pure hatred as they stared at Black. You tell any lie in the world to save your own skin, Black. Enough of this, said Lupin, and there was a steely note in his voice Violet had never heard before. There's one certain way to prove what really happened. Ron, give me that rat. What are you doing to do with him if I give him to you? Ron asked Lupin tensely. Force him to show himself, said Lupin. If he really is a rat, it won't hurt him. Ron hesitated. Then at long last he held out Scabbers and Lupin took him. Scabbers began to squeak without stopping, twisting and turning, his tiny black eyes bulging in his head. Ready, serious, said Lupin. Professor Lupin took his own wand out of his pocket and passed Snape's wand over to Black. Snape snarled wordlessly at the exchange, but remained in place, watching. Black approached Lupin and the struggling rat, and his wet eyes suddenly seemed to be burning in his face. Together, he said quietly. I think so, said Lupin, holding Scabbers tightly in one hand and his wand in the other. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. A flash of blue-white light erupted from both wands. For a moment, Scabbers was frozen in midair, his small grey form twisting madly. Ron yelled the rat hit the floor. There was another blinding flash of light, and then it was like watching a speeded-up film of a growing tree. A head was shooting upward from the ground. Limbs were sprouting. A moment later, a man was standing where Scabbers had been, cringing and wringing his hands. Crookshanks was spitting and snarling on the bed. The hair on his back was standing up. He was a very short man, hardly taller than Harry. His thin, colorless hair was unkempt, and there was a large, bald spot on top. He had the shrunken appearance of a plump man who had lost a lot of weight in a short time. His skin looked grubby, almost like Scabbers' fur, and something of the rat lingered around his pointed nose and his very small, watery eyes. He looked around at them all, his breathing fast and shallow. Violet saw his eyes dart to the door and back again. Well, hello, Peter, said Lupin pleasantly, as though rats frequently erupted into old-school friends around him. Long time no see. Sirius, Remus. Even Pettigrew's voice was squeaky. Again, his eyes darted toward the door. My friends, my old friends. Black's wand arm rose, but Lupin seized his wrist, gave him a warning look, then turned again to Pettigrew, his voice light and casual. We've been having a little chat, Peter, about what happened the night Lily and James died. You might have missed the finer points while you were squeaking around down there on the bed. Remus, gasped Pettigrew, and Violet could see beads of sweat breaking out over his pasty face. You don't believe him, do you? He tried to kill me, Remus. So we've heard, said Lupin more coldly. I'd like to clear up one or two little matters with you, Peter, if you'd be so. He's come to try and kill me again. Pettigrew squeaked suddenly, pointing at Black, and Violet saw that he used his middle finger because his index was missing. He killed Lily and James, and now he's going to kill me too. You've got to help me, Remus. Black's face looked more skull-like than ever as he stared at Pettigrew with his fathomless eyes. "No one's going to try and kill you until we've sorted a few things out," said Lupin. "Sorted things out," squealed Pettigrew, looking wildly about him once more, eyes taking in the boarded windows and again the only door. "I knew he'd come after me. I knew he'd be back for me. I've been waiting for this for 12 years. You knew Sirius was going to break out of Azkaban," said Lupin, his brow furrowed. "When nobody has ever done it before. He's got dark powers the rest of us can only dream of," Pettigrew shouted shrilly. "How else did he get out of there? I suppose he who must not be named taught him a few tricks. Snape would know all about it." Pettigrew's watery eyes fell to Professor Snape, frozen against the wall, and so did Violet's. Snape's face was ashen. His mouth was closed as he stared at Pettigrew, but his eyes were wide enough to see all the whites of them. "You—" She heard Snape breath, just barely through his thin lips. Then his face contorted. "It was you." "I expect Snape would know all about it," Black barked, not taking his eyes off of Pettigrew. "I'd love to see what sorts of tricks Voldemort taught him." Pettigrew flinched as thought Black had brandished a whip at him. Black began to laugh. "What, scared to hear your old master's name?" he said. "I don't blame you, Peter. His lot aren't very happy with you, are they?" "Don't know what you mean, Sirius," muttered Pettigrew, his breathing faster than ever. His whole face was shining with sweat. "You haven't been hiding from her for 12 years, said Black. "You've been hiding from Voldemort's old supporters. I heard things in Azkaban, Peter. They all think you're dead, or you'd have to answer to them. I've heard them screaming all sorts of things in their sleep. Sounds like they think the double-crosser double-crossed them. Voldemort went to the Potters, on your information, and Voldemort met his downfall there. And not all Voldemort's supporters ended up in Azkaban, did they? There are plenty out here, biding their time, pretending they've seen the error of their ways. If they ever got wind that you were still alive, Peter, don't know what you're talking about," said Pettigrew again, more shrilly than ever. He wiped his face on his sleeve. His wet eyes flicked first to Snape and then to Lupin. "You don't believe this madness, Remus. I must admit, Peter, I have difficulty in understanding why an innocent man would want to spend 12 years as a rat," said Lupin evenly. "Innocent, but scared," squealed Pettigrew. "If the Dark Lord's supporters were after me, it was because I put one of their best men in Azkaban, the spy, Sirius Black." Black's face contorted. "How dare you?" he growled. "I, a spy for Voldemort, for your Dark Lord. When did I ever sneak around people who were stronger and more powerful than myself? But you, Peter, I'll never understand why I didn't see you with a spy from the start. You always liked big friends who'd look after you, didn't you? It used to be us, me and Remus, and James." Pettigrew wiped his face again. He was almost panting for breath. "Me, a spy? Must be out of your mind. Never. Don't know how you can say such a— Lily and James made you secret keeper because I suggested it," Black hissed, so venomously that Pettigrew took a step backward. "I thought it was the perfect plan. A bluff. Voldemort would be sure to come after me, would never dream they'd use a weak, talentless thing like you. It must have been the finest moment of your miserable life, telling Voldemort you could hand him the Potters." Pettigrew was muttering distractedly. Violet caught words like far-fetched and lunacy, but she couldn't help paying more attention to the ashen color of Pettigrew's face and the way his eyes continued to dart toward the windows and door. "Professor Lupin," said Hermione timidly. Can I say something?" "Certainly, Hermione," said Lupin courteously. "Well, Scabbers, I mean, this man, he's been sleeping in Harry's dormitory for 3 years. If he's working for you-know-who, how come he never tried to hurt Harry before now?" "There," said Pettigrew shrilly, pointing at Hermione with his maimed hand. "Thank you, you see, Remus. I have never hurt a hair on Harry's head. Why should I?" "I'll tell you why," barked Black. "Because you never did anything for anyone, unless you could see what was in it for you. Voldemort's been in hiding for 13 years. They say he's half dead. You weren't about to commit murder right under Albus Dumbledore's nose, for a wreck of a wizard who'd lost all of his power, were you?" You'd want to be quite sure he was the biggest bully on the playground before you went back to him, wouldn't you? Why else did you find a wizarding family to take you in? Keeping an ear out for news, weren't you, Peter? Just in case your old protector regained strength and it was safe to rejoin him. Pettigrew opened his mouth and closed it several times. He seemed to have lost the ability to talk. Mr. Black Sirius, said Hermione. Black jumped at being addressed like this and stared at Hermione as though he had never seen anything quite like her. If you don't mind me asking, how did you get out of Azkaban if you didn't use dark magic? Thank you, gasped Pettigrew, nodding frantically at her. Exactly. Precisely what but Lupin silenced him with a look. Black was frowning slightly at Hermione, but not as though he were annoyed with her. He seemed to be pondering his answer. I don't know how I did it, he said slowly. I think the only reason I never lost my mind is that I knew I was innocent. That wasn't a happy thought, so the Dementors couldn't suck it out of me. But it kept me sane, and knowing who I am helped me keep my powers. So when it all became too much, I could transform in my cell, become a dog. Dementors can't see, you know. He swallowed. They feel their way toward people by feeding off their emotions. They could tell that my feelings were less human, less complex when I was a dog. But they thought, of course, that I was losing my mind like everyone else in there, so it didn't trouble them. But I was weak, very weak, and I had no hope of driving them away from me without a wand. But then I saw Peter in that picture. I realized he was at Hogwarts with Harry and Violet. Perfectly positioned to act if one hint reached his ears that the dark side was gathering strength again. Pettigrew was shaking his head, mouthing noiselessly, but staring all the while at Black as though hypnotized. Ready to strike at the moment he could be sure of allies, and to deliver the Potters to them. If he gave them Harry, who'd dare say he'd betrayed Lord Voldemort, he'd be welcomed back with honors. So you see, I had to do something. I was the only one who knew Peter was still alive. Violet remembered what Mr. Weasley had told Mrs. Weasley. The guards say he's been talking in his sleep, always the same words, he's at Hogwarts. It was as if something had lit a fire in my head and the Dementors couldn't destroy it. It wasn't a happy feeling. It was an obsession. But it gave me strength. It cleared my mind. So, one night when they opened my door to bring food, I slipped past them as a dog. It's so much harder for them to sense animal emotions that they were confused. I was thin, very thin, thin enough to slip through the bars. I swam as a dog back to the mainland. I journeyed north and slipped into the Hogwarts grounds as a dog. I've been living in the forest ever since, except when I came to watch the Quidditch match, of course. You fly as well as your father did, Harry. He looked at Harry and Violet, who did not look away. Believe me, croaked Black. Believe me, children, I never betrayed James and Lily. I would have died before I betrayed them. At long last, Violet believed him. She looked at Harry, who looked right back at her, and saw the same conclusion had been reached in his eyes. Violet looked back to Black, throat too tight to speak, and nodded. No. Pettigrew had fallen to his knees as though the twins' nod had been his own death sentence. He shuffled forward on his knees, groveling, his hands clasped in front of him as though praying. Sirius, it's me. It's Peter. Your friend, you wouldn't. Black kicked out and Pettigrew recoiled. There's enough filth on my robes without you touching them, said Black. Remus, Pettigrew squealed, turning to Lupin instead, writhing imploringly in front of him. You don't believe this. Wouldn't Sirius have told you they'd changed the plan? Not if he thought I was the spy, Peter, said Lupin. I assume that's why you didn't tell me, Sirius, he said casually over Pettigrew's head. Forgive me, Remus, said Black. Not at all, Padfoot, old friend, said Lupin, who was now rolling up his sleeves. And will you, in turn, forgive me for believing Yow the spy? Of course, said Black, and the ghost of a grin flitted across his gaunt face. He, too, began rolling up his sleeves. Shall we kill him together? Yes, I think so, said Lupin grimly. You wouldn't, you won't, gasped Pettigrew, and he scrambled around to Ron. Ran, haven't I been a good friend, a good pet? You won't let them kill me, Ran, will you? You're on my side, aren't you? But Ran was staring at Pettigrew with the utmost revulsion. I let you sleep in Mibed, he said. Kind boy, kind master. Pettigrew crawled toward Ran. You won't let them do it. I was your rat. I was a good pet. If you made a better rat than a human, it's not much to boast about, Peter, said Black harshly. Ran, going still paler with pain, wrenched his broken leg out of Pettigrew's reach. Pettigrew turned on his knees, staggered forward, and seized the hem of Hermione's robes. Sweet girl. Clever girl, you won't let them. Help me. Hermione pulled her robes out of Pettigrew's clutching hands and backed away against the wall, looking horrified. Severus, cried Pettigrew, turning wildly towards Snape. He crawled toward him on his knees, eyes pleading. Severus, please, I can still be of use. You were always clever, so trusted. He knew you were. Get any closer. Snape breathed, shaking, shrinking against the wall, and I'll kill you with my bare hands. Pettigrew recoiled. He knelt, trembling uncontrollably, and turned his head slowly toward the twins. Harry, Violet, you look so much like James and Lily. How dare you speak to them? Roared Black. How dare you face them? How dare you talk about James in front of them? Harry, whispered Pettigrew, shuffling toward them, hands outstretched. Harry, James wouldn't have wanted me killed. James would have understood Violet. He would have shown me mercy. Both Black and Lupin strode forward, seized Pettigrew's shoulders, and threw him backward onto the floor. He sat there, twitching with terror, staring up at them. You sold James and Lily to Voldemort, said Black, who was shaking too. Do you deny it? Pettigrew burst into tears. It was horrible to watch, like an oversized, balding baby cowering on the floor. Sirius, what could I have done? The Dark Lord, you have no idea. He has weapons you can't imagine. I was scared, Sirius. I was never brave like you and Remus and James. I never meant it to happen. He, who must not be named, forced me. Don't lie, bellowed Black. You've been passing information to him for a year before Lily and James died. You were his spy. He was taking over everywhere, gasped Pettigrew. What was there to be gained by refusing him? What was there to be gained by fighting the most evil wizard who has ever existed? Said Black, with a terrible fury in his face. Only innocent lives, Peter. You don't understand, whined Pettigrew. He would have killed me, Sirius. Then you should have died, roared Black. Died rather than betray your friends, as we would have done for you. Black and Lupin stood shoulder to shoulder, wands raised. You should have realized, said Lupin quietly. If Voldemort didn't kill you, we would. Goodbye, Peter. Hermione covered her face with her hands and turned toward the wall. No, Harry yelled. He ran forward, placing himself in front of Pettigrew, facing the wands. You can't kill him, he said breathlessly. You can't. Black and Lupin looked staggered. Harry, this piece of vermin is the reason you have no parents, Black snarled. This cringing bit of filth would have seen you and your sister die, too, without turning a hair. You heard him. His own stinking skin meant more to him than your whole family. I know, Harry panted. We'll take him up to the castle. We'll hand him over to the Dementors. He can go to Azkaban, but don't kill him. No, said Violet, finally finding her voice. Everyone looked at her. She stared at Pettigrew's wet, hopeful eyes. I want him dead. Violet, Harry said, turning toward her imploringly. This isn't about him. I don't reckon our dad would have wanted his friends to become killers. Then they won't have to, Violet said, the ringing in her ears louder and clearer than it had ever been before. She pushed up the sleeves of her own robes and pointed her wand at Pettigrew. I'll do it myself. A stunned silence filled the room. It was broken by Pettigrew's high, trembling wail. Violet, please, he begged, hands reaching desperately for her. Please, lovely girl, I never meant. Oh, God, I've never known my mother because of you, Violet said, looking down her nose dispassionately at Pettigrew. I've never even heard my father's voice because of you. Violet, wait, Lupin said, starting toward her, but he choked suddenly, as though his voice had vanished. He clapped a hand helplessly to his throat. Violet pointed her wand right between Pettigrew's eyes, hating the way her hands were shaking, hating him, hating the long seconds that ticked past. They wouldn't want this, Roman 6, she heard Harry say from very far away. Mum and Dad. They wouldn't want you to do this. Pity they couldn't be the ones to tell me that, Violet muttered bitterly. Pettigrew let out a sob. She swallowed hard. Potter. Professor Snape's voice cut through the ringing, but just barely. Violet raised her eyes to meet his, fixed on her face. She couldn't name his expression if she tried. Do you even know the spell? Violet opened her mouth to retort, to snap back that off Corsesh knew the spell, but she didn't. And of all the things that had happened that night, all the truths and lies and terrible things that had come out, this was the thing that broke her. Violet heard another sob, then realized that it had come from her own mouth. She lowered her wand as though it suddenly weighed a ton, and seconds later Harry had taken it from her. He'll go to Azkaban, Harry repeated, taking hold of Violet's numb hand. If anyone deserves that place, he does. Pettigrew was still wheezing on the floor behind him. Very well, said Lupin, rasping more than usual as his voice returned to him. Stand aside, you two. Harry hesitated. I'm going to tie him up, said Lupin. That's all, I swear. Harry stepped to the side, gently pulling Violet along with him. Thin cords shot from Lupin's wand this time, and next moment Pettigrew was still wriggling on the floor, bound and gagged. But if you transform, Peter, growled Black, pointing Snape's wand at Pettigrew too, we will kill you. You agree, Harry? Violet. Violet looked down at the pitiful figure on the floor and nodded so that Pettigrew could see her. Right, said Lupin, suddenly businesslike. Ron, I can't mend bones nearly as well as Madame Pomfrey, so I think it's best if you just strap your leg up until we can get you to the hospital wind. He hurried over to Ron, bent down, tapped Ron's leg with his wand, and muttered, Ferula. Bandages spun around Ron's leg, strapping it tightly to a splint. Lupin helped him to his feet. Ron put his weight gingerly on the leg and didn't wince. That's better, he said. Thanks. My wand, said Professor Snape suddenly, hand outstretched toward Black. Give it here. Black held Snape's wand carefully out of reach. I think bloody well not, he growled. Why would I give it back, so you can hex me the moment my back is turned? I don't need a wand to hurt you, Black, Snape ground out, and Lupin darted quickly between the two of them. Severus, please, you've just seen the truth. Sirius is innocent. Innocence is relative, Snape snapped, trying to step around Lupin only to be blocked again. Black let out a harsh bark of laughter. You'd know all about that, wouldn't you, Snivelus? He said coldly. How can you challenge Dumbledore's judgment, letting a werewolf teach, when he's already got Ariel Monster on his staff? Sirius, that's enough, Lupin said sharply. He turned and snatched Snape's wand out of Black's grasp. I'll hold on to this for now, all right. I don't think either of you ought to. What gives you the right? Snape started, shoving Lupin roughly. But then Black reached around Lupin to grab for Snape, trying to hit any part of him that he could reach, while Lupin struggled vainly to keep them separated. Stop it, shouted Hermione suddenly, stepping forward. All three men turned to look at her. Can't you see we've got bigger problems right now? Lupin, Snape, and Black all looked back at Pettigrew, still bound on the floor, though he had been wriggling in the direction of the door. Slowly, the three of them stepped away from each other. That's a very good point, Hermione, said Lupin calmly. He tucked Professor Snape's wand into his robes and bent to pick up the invisibility cloak. Two of us should be chained to this, said Black, nudging Pettigrew with his toe. I'll do it, said Lupin. And me, said Violet and Ron at the same time. They looked at each other for a long, tense moment, and Ron lowered his eyes in acceptance. Yeah, you go ahead, he muttered. Suppose it should be you. Lupin conjured heavy manacles from thin air. Soon, Pettigrew was upright again, left arm chained to Lupin's right arm to Violet's left. Grudgingly, Harry returned her wand to her hand. Violet shuddered to be so close to Pettigrew, to hear his soft snuffles from behind the tight rope gag, but she wouldn't have trusted anyone else to do this. Crooks, she called, looking back into the room. Are you coming? Crookshanks leapt lightly off the bed and led the way out of the room, his bottle-brush tail held jauntily high. Violet had never been part of a stranger group. Crookshanks led the way down the stairs. Professor Lupin, Pettigrew, and Violet herself went next, looking like entrants in a six-legged race. Next came Sirius Black, the man who up until an hour ago Violet had blamed for the death of her parents and believed to be after her brother's life as well, trudging along quietly. Harry and Hermione followed behind him, Ron supported between them, and then, sullenly and wandlessly bringing up the rear, was Professor Snape. Getting back into the tunnel was difficult. Violet, Lupin, and Pettigrew had to turn sideways to manage it. Both Violet and Professor Lupin had Pettigrew covered with their wands. "You know what this means?" Black said abruptly as they made their slow progress along the tunnel. Turning Pettigrew in. "You're free," said Harry. "Yes," said Black, "but I don't know if anyone ever told you, Harry, I'm your godfather." "Yeah, I knew that," said Harry. "Well, your parents appointed me your guardian," said Black stiffly. "Both of you actually, since Moonywell, if anything happened to them." Violet's head whipped around to look at Black, and she locked eyes with Harry. Did Black mean what they thought he meant? "I'll understand, of course, if you want to stay with your aunt and uncle," said Black. "But, well, think about it. Once my name's cleared, if you wanted a different home, what live with you?" Harry said, accidentally cracking his head on the bit of rock Violet had just narrowly avoided. "Leave the Dursleys." "Of course, I thought you wouldn't want to," said Black quickly, looking back and forth between them. "I understand, I just thought Are you insane?" Violet said, her voice easily as croaky as Black's. "Of course we want to leave the Dursleys. Have you got a house? When can we move in?" Black turned right around to look at her, eyes wide. "You want to," he said, looking quickly at Harry. "You mean it, both of you?" "Yeah," said Harry and Violet together. Black's gaunt face broke into the first true smile Violet had seen upon on the difference it made was startling, as though a person 10 years younger were shining through the starved mask. For a moment, he was recognizable as the man who had laughed in the photograph of Harry and Violet's parents' wedding. From the back of the line, Professor Snape cleared his throat loudly. "As usual, Black, you're presuming rather a lot of yourself," he said coldly. "I highly doubt you're any more fit to look after these children than their current guardians are." "What's that supposed to mean, Snape?" Black snapped, immediately turning to glare at Professor Snape. "Why shouldn't I be fit? And what about their current guardians? What do I know about looking after children?" "I am a Hogwarts professor," Snape sneered. "It is quite literally my job to look after children. You were half a child yourself when you got yourself thrown in Azkaban, and I can't imagine your mentality has been improved after 12 years behind bars years, by your own admission, which you spent as a dog." "Severus," called Lupin's voice from the front of the line, just as Sirius had opened his mouth to retort. "Perhaps you'll recall me asking you to be quiet." Snape's face darkened. "I don't take orders from you, Lupin," he snarled. "Nor will I encourage the cruel delusion that the Potters will find themselves shacked up with a convicted murderer come the end of term." "And here, I thought you were a big fan of cruel delusions," Sirius muttered. Snape's eyes narrowed dangerously, but thankfully neither of them spoke again until they reached the end of the tunnel. Crookshanks darted up first. He had evidently pressed his paws against whatever part of the trunk switched off the rest of the tree, because Lupin, Pettigrew, and Violet clambered upward without any sound of savaging branches. Black helped Harry, Ron, and Hermione up through the hole, but did not extend such courtesy to Professor Snape. Violet doubted he would have accepted it anyways. He and Black were still glaring hatefully at one another. The grounds were very dark now. The only light came from the distant windows of the castle. Without a word, they set off. Pettigrew was still wheezing and occasionally whimpering. Violet's mind was buzzing. She and Harry were going to leave the Dursleys. They were going to live with Sirius Black, their parents' best friend. She felt dazed. What would happen when they told the Dursleys that they were going to live with the convict they'd seen on television? "One wrong move, Peter," said Lupin threateningly. His wand was still pointed sideways at Pettigrew's chest, and Violet remembered suddenly to keep hers raised as well. Silently they tramped through the grounds, the castle lights growing slowly larger. Violet was just thinking how glad she would be to get back and be able to get away from Pettigrew when a cloud shifted. There were suddenly dim shadows on the ground. Their party was bathed in moonlight. Violet collided with Pettigrew, who had collided with Professor Lupin, who had come to an abrupt halt. She heard someone gasp behind her. "The potion," said Hermione, and Violet's blood ran cold with understanding. "He didn't take his potion tonight. He's not safe." As if in slow motion, Violet's eyes traveled from the thick, heavy manacle around her own wrist, connecting her to Pettigrew, his other arm bearing an identical manacle which connected him to Lupin. She could see Lupin's rigid silhouette just a few steps ahead. Then his limbs started to shake. "Run," Black whispered. "Run, now." But Violet couldn't run. She was chained in place. "Violet," she heard Harry gasp, and felt a hand brush her arm, and then sounds of a scuffle, but didn't dare take her eyes off of Lupin to see what was going on. "Leave it to me," Black said desperately. "Run!" There was a terrible snarling noise, followed by a series of rapid, sickening cracks. Lupin's head was lengthening, so was his body. The shoulders of his robes stretched and ripped as his shoulders began to hunch, accompanied by another set of terrible snaps. Hair was sprouting visible on his face and hands, which were curling into clawed paws. Crookshank's hair was on end. He was backing away as the werewolf that was her godfather reared, snapping its long jaws. Its head turned to look back behind it, and Violet found herself locking eyes with a monster. The werewolf didn't have Lupin's kind, hazel eyes. Its eyes were yellow and poisonous, and held none of the love she associated with the man they should have belonged to. There was something sickly about the beast that made it all the more horrifying to look at. Its ribs were starkly visible through its nearly hairless flank. Taut, sinewy muscles stretched just beneath the skin, and every move it made looked like pure agony. From its thin chest, a low, rumbling growl started to build as it shifted toward her. Violet's mouth opened in a scream. Something massive brushed past her and leapt through the air. Sirius had transformed as well. The enormous, bear-like dog bounded forward. As the werewolf wrenched itself free of the manacle binding it, the dog seized it about the neck and pulled it backward, away from Violet and Pettigrew. They were locked, jaw to jaw, claws ripping at each other. Violet stood, transfixed by the sight, too intent upon the horrifying battle to notice anything else. It was the feeling of her wand being ripped from her hands that brought her back to reality. Pettigrew had snatched her wand with his newly freed hand, now aiming it straight at her face. Violet threw herself forward without thinking and bowled Pettigrew right off his feet. Her full weight landed on top of him, knocking the wind out of him and knocking her wand out of his hand. She was reaching for it as Pettigrew's fingers closed around a stone in the grass. The rock collided with the side of Violet's head and sent stars exploding behind her eyes. Dazed and in pain, Violet was dimly aware of lots of yelling going on around her. The ground was shifting beneath her, not the ground, Violet realized belatedly, shaking her head, but the thing she had landed on. Pettigrew was transforming. "Oh, no, you bloody don't," Violet ground out. Her vision cleared in time to see his bold tail whip through the manacles on her outstretched arm and heard her scurrying through the grass. In blind desperation, Violet threw out her right hand after the noise. A bright red flash blinded her anew as a length of scarlet rope shot from her palm, lashing out into the tall grass. Violet felt it snag, heard a strangled squeak, and a moment later found herself holding the frantically squirming little body of Scabbers Pettigrew in his animagus form. "Violet," it was Hermione, kneeling beside her and looking very shaken. "You got him. I saw Pettigrew transform. I thought—" "Oh," Violet hissed. Pettigrew had just sank his sharp little teeth into the meat of her palm. Violet gave him a vicious squeeze, not feeling the least bit sorry now that she knew he wasn't a real rat, and redoubled her hold. "I've got the bastard," she said, sitting up with Hermione's help. Pettigrew was still thrashing in her hands, but Violet now had her fingers circled tightly around his thin throat. "Is Harry okay?" "He ran off after Sirius Black," Hermione said, her voice high with fear. "The werewolf Professor Lupin ran off, but Black went after him and the Narrow went off. I couldn't stop him, Violet." "Idiot," Violet murmured, trying clumsily to get to her feet. Her head was pounding with pain, and her vision swam once more as she stood up. "Which way?" Violet took 3 steps toward the dark tree line before a strong hand clasped tightly onto her shoulder. "Don't you dare, Potter," said Professor Snape, dragging her back to where she'd just been. "I have to help Harry," Violet said, trying to shake his hold to little effect. She tried to take another step backward, but her vision swam once more, and then she was falling. Professor Snape caught her by the arm and held her upright. Violet could feel him shaking. "Granger," Snape snapped suddenly, "my wand. There in the grass. Bring it here." Hermione scrambled amid the ruin of Lupin's robes and hastily passed Professor Snape's wand back to him. The tip immediately glowed with bright white light, illuminating the grounds around them. Ron was a short distance away, green in the face, and balancing awkwardly on his good leg. "Help Weasley walk," Professor Snape ordered Hermione, still holding tight to Violet's arm. "Potter, can you walk on your own?" "Yes, sir," Violet said, trying again to pull out of his grip. This time he let her go, and Violet immediately staggered backward, falling again. She landed on the springy, unexpected surface of a stretcher levitating in midair. "Foolish girl," she heard Snape mutter, and then she was floating away literally. The stretcher moved silently over the damp grass, and all Violet could do was lie back and stare up at the starry sky above. The full moon shone brightly through the clouds, fixed in the sky like a great eye. Violet managed to stay conscious until they reached the great wooden doors of the entrance hall. She was aware enough to hear several cries of alarm and a series of footsteps coming down the steps, and then the darkness that had been lingering at the edges of her vision rushed in all at once and swallowed her whole. Chapter 19. Hermione's Secret. Shocking business. Shocking. Miracle none of them died. Never heard the like. By thunder, it was lucky you were there, Snape. Thank you, Minister. Pity about the boy. The beast will be put down, of course, once he's located, but, well, what's done is done. And this business with Black. Couldn't he helped, of course, but I'm afraid the Prophet will be having a field day with it all. Violet lay listening with her eyes tight shut. Her head was throbbing. Her limbs felt leaden and stiff. The words she was hearing were slightly muffled, as though her ears had been loosely stuffed with cotton. Or perhaps there was something wrapped around her head. Potter was lucky, terribly lucky, all things considered. That many Dementors if they'd found him. And you, coming across him before the beast could finish him off. The Dementors didn't give a one trouble, did they, Snape? No, Minister. By the time I arrived, they were heading back to their positions at the entrances. And Black. There was nothing to be done for him, though I took the necessary precautions. Bound and gagged him, conjured stretchers, and brought them both straight back to the castle. There was a pause. Violet's brain seemed to be moving a little faster, and as it did, a gnawing sensation grew in the pit of her stomach. She opened her eyes. Everything was far too bright. Violet closed her eyes again and blinked, hard, waiting to adjust to the minimal light. She was lying in the dark hospital wing. At the very end of the ward, she could make out Madame Pomfrey with her back to her, bending over a bed. Violet squinted. Ron's red hair was visible beneath Madame Pomfrey's arm. Violet moved her head over on the pillow. In the bed to her right lay Hermione. Moonlight was falling across her bed. Her eyes were open too, and her cheeks were stained with tear tracks. She looked petrified, and when she saw that Violet was awake, pressed a finger to her lips, then pointed to the hospital wing door. It was ajar, and the voices of Cornelius Fudge and Professor Snape were coming through it from the corridor outside. Madame Pomfrey now came walking briskly up the dark ward to Violet's bed. She turned to look at her. Her face was also very pale, and she was carrying the largest block of chocolate Violet had ever seen in her life. It looked like a small boulder. Ah, you're awake, she said briskly. She placed the chocolate on Violet's bedside table and began breaking it apart with a small hammer. The banging sound lanced through Violet's aching skull. She raised her hands to cover her ears and found that there was, in fact, a bandage of some sort wrapped around her head. "Where's Harry?" said Violet at once. "I'm here, Roman 6, said Harry's voice from her left, and she looked over to see her brother in the bed on the other side of her. He looked very pale and he wasn't wearing his glasses. "What happened?" Violet asked, trying to sit up. Madame Pomfrey's hands were on her shoulders at once, pushing her back down onto the mattress. "Now, dear, you've got a concussion, took a nasty blow to the head," Madame Pomfrey said. "I won't have you getting up and doing yourself further injury." "But what happened?" Violet pressed, peering at Harry. Unlike her, he had been undressed and put in a pair of light blue hospital pajamas. She could see the white of gauze peeking up through his collar, and his left arm was cradled awkwardly against his chest. "Are you hurt?" "Am fine," Harry muttered, not looking at her. "You're not." "Harry, what's the matter? Why are you—" "Eat this, dear," said Madame Pomfrey curtly, pressing a chunk of chocolate into Violet's open mouth. Violet spat it out, despite the wonderful taste. "I don't need that," she said when Madame Pomfrey tutted and tried to give her another chunk. "Where's Sirius? What happened to Pettigrew?" "Potter," said Madame Pomfrey soothingly, "it's all right. They've got them both. Black's been dealt with, and Pettigrew is locked away upstairs." "What do you mean he's been dealt with?" Violet said, her voice going high with panic. "Harry, what's going on? Is he all right?" Harry didn't answer her. His eyes were lowered down into his lap, staring at his hands, which Violet could now see were faintly trembling. She turned to look at Hermione for answers, but Hermione wouldn't meet her eyes either. A terrible tightness closed around Violet's throat. "Is he dead?" Harry's voice was very faint. He croaked, "The Dementors." "Violet, dear, please, this isn't the time," Madame Pomfrey said, trying to press a glass of water toward her. Violet threw back the covers and knocked the glass to the floor, not caring that it shattered, not caring that she was being shouted at, as she ran into the corridor outside where Fudge and Professor Snape were standing. "Violet, Violet, what's this?" said Fudge, looking agitated. "You should be in bed. Where's Sirius?" she demanded, walking right up to the Minister of Magic and staring him in the face. "Where is he? What have you done with him?" Fudge went slightly green. "Ah, well, Violet, dear, I'm afraid that's rather a sensitive topic at the moment. Things have come to light. You know, recently there wasn't time. Tell me where he is," Violet shouted. "He's here, Violet," said Harry's voice. Violet whipped around to see her brother standing weakly in the doorway, leaning heavily on Hermione. His eyes were hollow and red-rimmed, and she could see a terrible sadness in them. Harry nodded his head back into the hospital wing. "Come on. You can see him." With the blood pounding in her ears and in a sick churning in her guts, Violet slowly walked back to the doors of the infirmary. With Hermione's help, Harry turned away and led her to the back of the room, past Ron's bed, where the same high blue curtain that had once hidden the petrified Colin Creevey from view had been erected. As Violet reached out to pull it aside, Madame Pomfrey quickly bustled in front of them. "Absolutely not," she said stiffly. "Children, that ice snuff. All of you return to your beds at once, or I'll have the headmaster in here to—" "Ah, but what could I possibly do that you cannot, Madame Pomfrey?" said a new voice from the door. Professor Dumbledore had arrived, looking very grave. The hospital wing was silent as he approached, Snape and Fudge following curiously behind him. "It's all right, Poppy," Dumbledore said softly. "Please let Violet see Sirius Black." "Headmaster," Madame Pomfrey gasped. "No child should see anyone in such a state. There's nothing she can," without waiting for Madame Pomfrey to finish. Violet darted under her arm and slipped around the curtain. Much to her surprise, Sirius was sitting up in his hospital bed. The blankets were folded neatly over his lap, and there was a glass of water on the table beside him. "Sirius," Violet exclaimed, rushing to his side. "Are you all right? What happened to Professor Lupin?" Sirius didn't answer. He didn't so much as turn his head toward her, though his eyes were open. Violet reached out and grabbed his hand. Sirius, can you hear me? It's Violet, what's the matter? Again, Sirius did not respond. His gaze was fixed on the wall across from him, unblinking, and he gave no response to Violet's grip on his hand. His skin was warm, but his expression was blank and slack, as though he were not fully conscious. Sirius, Violet repeated. A terrible chill was spreading through her heart. She dropped Sirius' hand as though it had burned her and took a step back, away from his empty eyes and blank stare. He's gone, Romans 6, said Harry from behind her. Violet turned to him with wild eyes. What do you mean he's gone? He's right there. Harry, what's wrong with him? Why won't he answer me? Harry's eyes were nearly as empty as Sirius. He turned away from her as well, looking down at the floor. Violet wanted to reach out and shake him, shout at him, demand that he explain the truth she was already coming to know in her heart. They kissed him, Harry mumbled. The Dementors by the lake. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't get to him. He shook his head mournfully and then winced, clutching his left arm closer to his chest. Violet could see bloody bandages peeking out from beneath his sleeve now. What happened? She demanded. Her throat was so tight that the words physically hurt to say. Harry, your arm. Harry turned his body away from her. It's fine, he muttered again, still not looking at her. It's just a scratch. I got it when we were running before the Dementors found us. You were with him. You saw it happen when Sirius. Harry shook his head again. Not with him, but I was nearby, close enough to see when there was a bustling sound, and a firm arm fixed itself around Harry's shoulders, steering him away from Sirius's bedside. That's enough, said Madame Pomfrey shortly. Enough, dears, come along. You need your rest. The curtain was moved back into place, closing the empty body of Sirius Black away from the rest of the hospital wing, and Violet and Harry were pulled back around toward their beds. Fudge, Hermione, and Professors Snape and Dumbledore were standing silently in the middle of the room. Fudge was wringing the rim of his lime-green bowler in his nervous hands. As Harry was being tucked very tightly back into his bed without putting up any sort of fuss, which scared Violet more than anything, Professor Dumbledore stepped forward. My apologies, Poppy, but I need a word with Miss Potter as well as Miss Granger, he said. If you could excuse us, Headmaster, Madame Pomfrey said sharply, as though digging her heels in for a fight. They need treatment, they need rest. This cannot wait, said Dumbledore. I must insist. Madame Pomfrey pursed her lips and strode away into her office at the end of the ward, slamming the door behind her. Fudge, still looking quite queasy, consulted the large gold pocket watch dangling from his waistcoat. Ah, the Dementors should have arrived by now, he said. I'll go and meet them. Dumbledore, I'll meet you upstairs. He crossed to the door and held it open for Professor Snape, but Snape hadn't moved. You've spoken to Pettigrew, Snape whispered, his eyes fixed on Dumbledore's face. I have, Dumbledore said calmly. And you are aware that the students were attacked by... I am aware, Severus, said Dumbledore, a slightly harder edge to his voice. I wish to speak to these young ladies alone now. Snape looked on the verge of arguing. His black eyes flicked from Professor Dumbledore to Hermione, to Violet, and then to the bed where Harry lay, immobile. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode from the ward behind Fudge. The door closed behind them, and Dumbledore turned to Violet and Hermione. How could they? Violet said at once, staring up into his gleaming blue eyes. Sirius was innocent, how could they? The Dementors had their orders, Dumbledore said calmly, and those capable of ordering them down would not learn the truth until it was far too late. Now, children, I ask that you listen before the point of no return elapses once more. Can the kiss be reversed? Violet asked, breathless, desperate, and deflated when Dumbledore shook his head. It is impossible to retrieve a soul once it has been lost. But there was an odd, intense gleam behind Dumbledore's half-moon spectacles. It may be possible to prevent such a terrible loss. What we need is more time. But Hermione began, and then her eyes became very round. Oh, now, pay attention, said Dumbledore, speaking very low and very clearly. Harry and Sirius were found by the Black Lake's edge, on the cusp of the forest. If all goes well, you will be able to save more than one innocent life tonight. But remember this, you must not be seen. Miss Granger, you know the law, you know what is at stake. You must not be seen. Violet didn't have a clue what was going on. Dumbledore had turned on his heel and looked back as he reached the door. I am going to lock you in. It is, he consulted his watch, 5 minutes to midnight. Miss Granger, 3 turns should do it. Good luck, good luck, repeated Violet as the door closed behind Professor Dumbledore. 3 turns? What does any of that mean? What are we supposed to do? But Hermione was fumbling with the neck of her robes, pulling from beneath them a very long, very fine gold chain. Violet, come here, she said urgently. Quick! Violet moved toward her, completely bewildered. Hermione was holding the chain out. She saw a tiny, sparkling hourglass hanging from it. Here she had thrown the chain around Violet's neck too. Ready, she said breathlessly. Ready for what? Hermione turned the hourglass over 3 times. The dark ward dissolved. Violet had the sensation that she was flying very fast, backward. A blur of colors and shapes rushed past her. Her ears were pounding. She tried to yell but couldn't hear her own voice. And then she felt solid ground beneath her feet. And everything came into focus again. She was standing next to Hermione in the deserted entrance hall, and a stream of golden sunlight was falling across the paved floor from the open door. Violet looked wildly around at the other girl, the chain of the hourglass cutting into her neck. Hermione, what? In here? Hermione seized her by the arm and dragged her across the hall to the door of a broom closet. She opened it, pushed Violet inside among the buckets and mops, then slammed the door behind them. What, how, Hermione? What happened? Violet gasped. We've gone back in time, Hermione whispered, lifting the chain from their necks in the darkness. 3 hours back. Violet gaped at her. What? SHH, listen, someone's coming. I think it might be us. Hermione had her ear pressed against the cupboard door. Footsteps across the hall. Yes, I think it's us going down to Hagrid's. What are you talking about? Violet whispered. I haven't been to Hagrid since. Not you, Harry and Ron and me. I'm sure it's us. It doesn't sound like more than 3 people. And we're walking slowly because we're under the invisibility cloak, she broke off, listening intently. We've gone down the front steps. Hermione sat down on an upturned bucket, looking desperately anxious, but Violet wanted a few questions answered. What is that hourglass thing? It's called a time-turner, Hermione whispered, and I got it from Professor McGonagall on our first day back. I've been using it all year to get to all my classes. Professor McGonagall made me swear I wouldn't tell anyone. She had to write all sorts of letters to the Ministry of Magic so I could have one. She had to tell them that I was a model student and that I'd never, ever use it for anything except my studies. I've been turning it back so I could do hours over again. That's how I've been doing several lessons at once, see? But I don't understand what Dumbledore wants us to do. Why did he tell us to go back 3 hours? How's that going to help Sirius? Violet stared at Hermione's shadowy face. There must be something that happened around now he wants us to change, she said slowly. What happened 3 hours ago? What were you doing? This is 3 hours ago, and I'm out there. She jerked her thumb toward the closet door walking down to Hagrid's, said Hermione. Violet, what were you doing? I was going to see Professor Lupin, Violet said, frowning. Well, I was going to see Tracy, but I got distracted and went to see him instead. How does that help? It doesn't. Hermione gripped her own hair in a panic. Why 3 hours? And what did Dumbledore mean? We could save more than one innocent life tonight. Who else is in danger of? Hermione and Violet locked eyes. Buckbeak, they said together. But how will saving Buckbeak help Sirius? Hermione asked desperately. I don't know, but what else could Dumbledore have been talking about? Violet said. We've got to at least try. Hermione didn't exactly look convinced, but she steeled herself nonetheless. She stood from her bucket and pressed her ear against the door. Doesn't sound like anyone's there. Wait, I hear footsteps. Just one person, it sounds like. Me, Violet whispered, eyes wide. That's got to be me, heading up to Lupin's office. The realization hit Violet that she was not only there in the cupboard, but also outside of the cupboard walking across the entrance hall. It was a very strange sensation. She shook her head. We should be all right. I didn't linger. Let's go. Hermione pushed open the closet door. The entrance hall was deserted, with only the faint echo of Violet's footsteps disappearing up the grand staircase. As quickly and quietly as they could, they darted out of the closet and down the stone steps. The shadows were already lengthening, the tops of the trees in the forbidden forest gilded once more with gold. If anyone's looking out of the window, Hermione squeaked, looking up at the castle behind them. We'll run for it, said Violet determinedly. Straight into the forest, all right. We'll have to hide behind a tree or something and keep a lookout. Okay, but we'll go around by the greenhouses, said Hermione breathlessly. We need to keep out of sight of Hagrid's front door, or we'll see us. We must be nearly at Hagrid's by now. Hermione set off as at a spring while Violet, still working out what that meant, ran behind her. They tore across the vegetable gardens to the greenhouses, paused for a moment behind them, then set off again, fast as they could, skirting around the whooping willow, tearing toward the shelter of the forest. Safe in the shadows of the trees, the girls paused for a moment to catch their breath. Right, Hermione gasped. We need to sneak over to Hagrid's. Try to keep out of sight. They made their way silently through the trees, keeping to the very edge of the forest. Then, as they glimpsed the front of Hagrid's house, they heard a knock upon his door. They moved quickly behind a wide oak trunk and peered out around the sides. Hagrid had appeared in his doorway, shaking and white, looking around to see who had knocked. And then, from across the way, even though she had just seen him laying in bed in the hospital wing, Violet heard her brother's voice. It's us. We're wearing the invisibility cloak. Let us in, and we can take it off. Yes, shouldn't have come, Hagrid whispered. He stood back, then shut the door quickly. That's you, Violet said dumbly. What? She nodded in the direction of the cabin. You're over there with Ron and Harry, but you're also right here. Oh, said Hermione. Yes, I suppose I am. Doesn't that weird you out a little bit? Hermione pressed her lips together. It didn't until you pointed it out like that. She shook her head and whispered, Let's move up a bit. We need to get nearer Buckbeak. They crept through the trees until they saw the nervous hippogriff tethered to the fence around Hagrid's pumpkin patch. Now, Violet whispered. No, said Hermione. If we steal him now, the minister will think Hagrid set him free. We've got to wait until they've seen he's tied outside. But that's not enough time to move him, is it? Said Violet anxiously. This was starting to seem impossible. At that moment, there was a crash of breaking china from inside Hagrid's cabin. That's Hagrid breaking the milk jug, Hermione whispered. I'm going to find Scabbers in a moment. Scabbers, Violet said in alarm. You mean he was with Hagrid? He must have been trying to hide until nightfall. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they heard Hermione's shriek of surprise. Hermione, said Violet suddenly, what if we just run in there and grab Pettigrew, show him to Dumbledore right now, and put a stop to everything? No, said Hermione in a terrified whisper. Don't you understand? We're breaking one of the most important wizarding laws. Nobody's supposed to change time. Nobody. You heard Dumbledore if we're seen. Yow can't be seen, Violet pointed out. Up in the castle with Professor Lupin right now, I could just... But then what would happen when you're taken back up to the castle with Dumbledore and the minister? Hermione hissed. How would it go if you and Lupin came out of his office and there swoof you? Don't you see? Professor McGonagall told me that awful things have happened when wizards have meddled with time. Loads of them end up killing their past or future selves by mistake or accidentally hurting the people they're trying to save. Okay, said Violet miffed. It was just an idea I just thought, but Hermione nudged her and pointed toward the castle. Violet peered around the tree she was hidden behind to get a clear view of the distant front doors. Dumbledore, Fudge, and Macnair, the executioner, were coming down the steps. We're about to come out, Hermione breathed. And sure enough, moments later, Hagrid's back door opened, and Violet saw Harry, Ron, and Hermione walking out of it with Hagrid. She looked at Hermione beside her, then back to the Hermione across the way, then had to rub her eyes very hard to remember that this wasn't all some sort of wild dream. "It's okay, Beaky, it's okay," Hagrid said to Buckbeak. Then he turned to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. "Go on, get going. Hagrid, we can't. We'll tell them what really happened. They can't kill him. Go." "It's bad enough without you lot in trouble and all." Violet watched her brother and his friends disappear beneath the invisibility cloak once more. "Go quick. Dan, listen." There was a knock on Hagrid's front door. The execution party had arrived. Hagrid turned around and headed back into his cabin, leaving the back door ajar. Violet watched the grass flatten in patches all around the cabin and heard 3 pairs of feet retreating. Harry, Ron, and Hermione had gone. But the Hermione standing next to Violet, hidden in the trees, could now hear what was happening inside the cabin through the back door. "Where is the beast?" came a gruff, cold voice that Violet assumed must belong to Macnair. Outside," Hagrid croaked. Violet pulled her head out of sight as Macnair's bearded face appeared in Hagrid's window, staring out at Buckbeak. Then they heard Fudge. "We have to read you the official notice of execution, Hagrid. I'll make it quick, and then you and Macnair need to sign it." "Macnair, you're supposed to listen too. That's procedure." Macnair's face vanished from the window. It was now or never. "Wait here," Violet whispered, briefly squeezing Violet's shoulder. "I'll get him." As Fudge's voice started again, Violet darted out from behind her tree, vaulted the fence into the pumpkin patch, and approached Buckbeak. "It is the decision of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures that the Hippogriff Buckbeak, hereafter called the Condemned, shall be executed on the 6th of June at sundown. Careful not to blink." Violet stared up into the Hippogriff's fierce orange eyes and bowed deeply. Buckbeak sank to his scaly knees and then stood up again. Violet let out a sigh of relief and began to fumble with the knot of rope tying Buckbeak to the fence. Sentenced to execution by beheading to be carried out by the committee's appointed executioner, Walden Macnair. Violet had a hold of the rope, pulling, but the Hippogriff wasn't moving. "As witnessed below. Hagrid, you sign here." She was yanking on the rope with all her might, but Buckbeak had only taken a single step forward before digging in his feet. "Well, let's get this over with," said Fudge with a sigh. "Hagrid, perhaps it will be better if you stay inside." "No, I want to be with him. I darn want him to be alone." "Buckbeak, move," Violet hissed. Buckbeak began to walk, rustling its wings irritably. They were still 10 feet away from the forest, in place view of Hagrid's back door. "One moment, please, Macnair," came Dumbledore's voice. "You need to sign too." Violet heaved on the rope. Buckbeak snapped his beak and walked a little faster. "Quick! Quick!" Hermione moaned, darting out from behind her tree, seizing the rope too and adding her weight to make Buckbeak move faster. He broke into a grudging trot. They had reached the trees. A few steps more and they were now blocked from sight. They couldn't see Hagrid's garden at all. "Stop," Hermione hissed. "They might hear us." Hagrid's back door had opened with a bang. Violet and Hermione stood quite still. Even Buckbeak froze and seemed to be listening intently. Silence. Then, "Where is it?" said the bewildered voice of Fudge. "Where is the beast?" "It was tied here," said the executioner furiously. "I saw it just here." "How extraordinary," said Dumbledore. There was a note of amusement in his voice. "Beaky," said Hagrid hoarsely. There was a swishing noise and then the thud of an axe. The executioner seemed to have swung it into the fence in anger. And then came the howling, and Hagrid's words cut through his sobs. "Gone, gone. Bless his little beak, he's gone. Must have pulled himself free." "Beaky, yeah, clever boy." Buckbeak started to strain against the rope, trying to get back to Hagrid. Hermione and Violet again had to join their efforts to hold onto the rope to stop him. "Someone untied him," the executioner was snarling. "We should search the grounds, the forest. Macnair, if Buckbeak has indeed been stolen, do you really think the thief will have led him away on foot?" said Dumbledore, still sounding amused. "Search the skies, if you will. Hagrid, I could do with a cup of tea. Or a large brandy." Oh, course, Professor, said Hagrid, who sounded weak with happiness. Come in, come in. Violet and Hermione listened closely. They heard footsteps, the soft cursing of the executioner, the snap of the door, and then silence once more. Now what? Whispered Violet, looking around. We'll have to hide in here, said Hermione, who looked very shaken. We need to wait until they've gone back to the castle, then I suppose we can. We can just let Buckbeak go. She looked nervously over her shoulder into the depths of the forest. The sun was setting now. We're going to have to move, said Violet thoughtfully. We've got to be able to see the Whomping Willow, or we won't know what's going on. Okay, said Hermione, getting a firmer grip on Buckbeak's rope. But we've got to keep out of sight, remember. The three of them moved around the edge of the forest, darkness falling thickly around them, until they were hidden behind a clump of trees through which they could make out the willow. There's Ron, said Hermione suddenly. A dark figure was sprinting across the lawn, and its shout echoed through the still night air. Get away from him, get away, Scabbers, Kameha, and then they saw two more figures materialize out of nowhere. Violet watched Harry and Hermione appear, chasing after Ron, then she saw Ron dive. Gotcha. Get off, you stinking cat, they're serious, said Hermione. The great shape of a dog had bounded out from the roots of the willow. They saw him bowl Harry, then seize Ron. This is awful, Violet murmured, looking away from the scene of violence. It was even worse being in the middle of it, said Hermione, watching the dog pulling Ron into the roots. Ouch, getting hit by that Tririlahurt, and Harry got it worse than I did. Oh, Violet, you're right. This isward. The Whomping Willow was creaking and lashing out with its lower branches. Harry and Hermione were darting here and there, trying to reach the trunk. And then the tree froze. That was Crookshanks pressing the knot, said Hermione. I can't believe him, Violet said, fuming at the sight of Crookshanks' bottle-brush tail disappearing beneath the Whomping Willow. How could Mycathave been keeping secrets from me like this? I feed him and love him and try not to kick him off the bed at night, and this is how he repays me. There I go, Hermione muttered, pointing. We're in. The moment she and Harry disappeared, the tree began to move again. Seconds later, they heard footsteps quite close by. Dumbledore, McNair, and Fudge were making their way up to the castle. Right after we'd gone down into the passage, said Hermione. Ivan Lidumbledore had come with us. McNair and Fudge would have come too, said Violet bitterly, shivering. I bet you anything Fudge would have told McNair to murder Sirius on the spot. They watched the three men climb the castle steps and disappear from view. For a few minutes, the scene was deserted. Then here comes Lupin, said Violet, as they saw another figure sprinting down the stone steps and herring toward the willow. Violet looked up at the sky. Clouds were obscuring the moon completely. They watched Professor Lupin seize a broken branch from the ground and prod the knot on the trunk. The tree stopped fighting. Lupin, too, disappeared into the gap in its roots. He didn't see the cloak, said Violet. It's just lying there. She turned to Hermione. If I just dashed out now and grabbed it, do you think we could have it or invisibility cloaks in the future, or would one of them just— You mustn't, Hermione hissed angrily. I wasn't going to, said Violet defensively. I'm only asking, Hermione. I know we can't just go changing stuff. You said it was dangerous, Itis, Hermione insisted, but then she blinked at Violet, looking faintly embarrassed. Sorry, I didn't mean to snap, it's just I'm so used to Harry, having to stop him from running out and getting himself killed. Violet grinned at her. I know the feeling. Just then they heard a burst of song. It was Hagrid, making his way up to the castle, singing at the top of his voice and weaving slightly as he walked. A large bottle was swinging from his hand. No, Buckbeak. The hippogriff was making frantic attempts to get to Hagrid again. Violet and Hermione seized the rope with both hands, straining to hold Buckbeak back. They watched Hagrid meander tipsily up to the castle. He was gone. Buckbeak stopped fighting to get away. His head drooped sadly. There, Beaky, said Violet, stroking his feathers softly. You'll see him again, don't worry. Barely 2 minutes later, the castle doors flew open yet again, and Professor Snape came charging out of them, running toward the willow. "Hang on, where are you, Violet?" Hermione asked, looking around Buckbeak's neck at her. "I thought you came in with Professor Snape." Violet shook her head. "I followed him," she said, "after I broke out of Lupin's office. Snape locked me in after he saw everything happening on the map." "He locked you in," cried Hermione, horrified. "Why didn't he send you to Dumbledore or to Fudge?" Violet shrugged uncomfortably. She thought she might know the answer to that, but didn't want to say it out loud. If Professor Snape had his way, Sirius would have never left the Shrieking Shack alive. "Look, there you are." Violet looked around just in time to see her own small form darting across the lawn after Snape, moving quickly and keeping to the shadows. Professor Snape skidded to a halt near the tree, looking around. He grabbed the cloak and held it up. Then Snape seized the branch Lupin had used to freeze the tree, prodded the knot, and vanished from view beneath the cloak. Seconds later, Violet watched herself sprint toward the tree and disappear beneath the roots as well. "So that's it," said Hermione quietly. "We're all down there. And now we've just got to wait until we come back up again." She took the end of Buckbeak's rope and looked uncertainly at it. Should we let him go now? Won't he just go straight back to Hagrid's?" Violet said, frowning. She turned to look sadly at the hippogriff, who had perked up at Hagrid's name. "Even if he does, Hagrid will see him off again," Hermione said. "We saved his life, but I don't think we can protect him, Violet." "Well, we can't run him off," Violet huffed. "You saw what he did to Malfoy. Buckbeak's not a mindless beast, but he's still dangerous. And hippogriffs are proud. If we attack him, he'll fight back rather than running away." "Well, we can't just leave him here," Hermione muttered. "When Professor Lupin transformed, he went running in this direction, didn't he, if he found Buckbeak all tied up? Unless—" Hermione suddenly went very pale. "Unless what?" Violet pressed. Hermione shook her head quickly. She looked very upset. "Harry lied to you earlier, Violet," she said in a very small voice. "What?" Violet squawked. "No, he didn't. Harry would never. He lied about how he hurt his arm," Hermione continued quickly. "Harry didn't scratch himself. It wasn't even a scratch. It was abite." "Why would he lie about how he got hurt?" Violet asked angrily. "What sort of bite was it? What even bit him in the first PL?" She choked off in horrified realization. There was only one sort of bite that was worth lying about, and the only creature capable of giving it that was known to be in the area at the time, a werewolf. "No," said Violet at once, hating the miserable way that Hermione was looking at her. No, he wouldn't. Lupin would never. Of course, Professor Lupin would never hurt Harry," said Hermione gently. "But he wasn't Professor Lupin at the time. A werewolf has no memory of the person it used to be, Violet. It has no connection to the people it cares about. Lupin wouldn't have recognized Harry at all. He'd only see him as running prey." Violet let out a sudden moan of horror. She had just remembered the words Fudge had said while she was coming back to consciousness. Pity about the boy. "The beast will be put down, of course, once he's located, but, well, what's done is done. Lupin. Lupin was the beast Fudge was talking about. If Professor Lupin bit Harry while he was a werewolf, then Harry would become a werewolf too, and Lupin would be held responsible." "They're going to kill him," Violet breathed. Her insides had turned to ice, frozen with deepest dread. "Lupin." "Fudge," said Hermione. "They'll kill him and Harry. Harry hasn't been bitten yet," said Hermione firmly, though her eyes were full of tears. "He's still in the Shrieking Shack, and the moon won't come out for at least another hour. We can still put a stop to it somehow." "How?" Violet cried. "You said we can't be seen. We can't even go and warn them." "I know, Violet." "I don't." She stomped her foot, tears spilling down her cheeks in frustration. "I know we've got to do something. Professor Dumbledore said if we were lucky we'd be able to save more than one innocent life tonight, and I thought that meant we could save Buckbeak too, but now I'm wondering if—" Hermione's fingers curled white-knuckled around Buckbeak's rope. She was shaking slightly. Another wave of horrific realization washed over Violet. She looked from the hippogriff to the whooping willow, and then back again, sickness building in her stomach all the while. Violet tried to lick her lips, but her mouth had gone very dry. You said Lupin comes this way. Hermione nodded. Because he was chasing Sirius and Harry. Hermione nodded again, now looking faintly green. Werewolves are strong, she mumbled wetly, and fast. Faster than a person can run. He would have caught up to Harry in no time unless there was something faster and stronger in the way, Violet finished faintly. She was staring at Buckbeak. The hippogriff was digging at the earth beneath his talons, turning his great feathered head from side to side in curiosity. A familiar ringing had started at the base of Violet's skull. She felt like she was going to be sick. Violet held out her hand toward Hermione. "Give me the rope." Hermione's eyes went wide. "I could be wrong, Violet," she said quickly. We don't know if that's what Dumbledore meant, then it won't matter," said Violet shortly. "Give me the rope." "What are you going to do?" Hermione asked, clutching the rope to her chest with both hands. "I'm not going to hurt him, I'm just going to tie him up." "Violet, if it's a choice between the bird and my brother, I'm picking Harry," said Violet shortly. "I will always pick Harry, Hermione. I'm not going to ask again. You can either hand me that rope or I'll tie you up with it too." For a moment, Hermione looked very frightened of her. She stood frozen, staring wide-eyed into Violet's face, and then, moving jerkily, she stepped forward and pressed the end of Buckbeak's rope into Violet's outstretched hand. Violet turned and tied it securely around the nearest tree, then sat down on the dry ground, arms around her knees. After several long, tense moments, Hermione came and sat down beside her. They didn't speak for over an hour. Leaves rustled faintly in the breeze. The moon drifted in and out of sight behind the shifting clouds, but Violet couldn't bear to look up at it. She kept her arms wrapped tightly around her knees and stared over them toward the willow, waiting. And then, at last, "Here we come," Hermione whispered. She and Violet got to their feet. Buckbeak raised his head. They saw Lupin, Pettigrew, and Violet herself clambering awkward out of the hole in the ground, all chained together, followed by Sirius Black and Harry and Hermione, and Professor Snape coming out behind them all. They all began to walk toward the castle. Violet's heart was starting to beat very fast. She glanced up at the sky. Any moment now, that cloud was going to move aside and show the moon. "Let's go," she muttered, turning away. "I don't want to see this part again." Buckbeak chirped questioningly at them as they started moving deeper into the forest. Violet, her heart breaking, couldn't help but turn back to him and lay a hand on the side of his neck. "We'll come back for you, Beaky," she said tremulously. The hippogriff clicked his beak as though he knew she were lying. "You're fast and you're strong. You've got to stay here and protect Harry for me, all right? Can you do that, please?" Buckbeak turned his head, fixing her with one large orange eye, and then straightened up and ruffled his feathers proudly, looking every bit as fierce and regal as Hagrid had described him in class. He pawed the ground and stood firm. Violet smiled at him. "Good boy, Buckbeak," she whispered. Off in the distance, she heard herself scream. The chilling sound of it snapped Violet back into action. "Come on quick, we've got to move." "Where will we go?" Hermione said, voice high with panic. "Where are we going to hide? The Dementors will be coming any moment, back to Hagrid's," Violet said, grabbing hold of Hermione's hand. "It's empty now, come on." They ran as fast as they could, still holding on to each other's hands. They could hear the werewolf howling behind them. The cabin was in sight. Violet skidded to the door, wrenched it open, and Hermione flashed past her. Violet threw herself in after her and bolted the door. Fang the boarhound barked loudly. "SHH, Fang, it's us," said Hermione, hurrying over and scratching his ears to quiet him. "That was really close." "Yeah." Violet stared out the window toward the dark tree line. "I've got to get into the forest. Dumbledore said Harry and Sirius were found near the lake's edge." "What, by yourself?" asked Hermione, astonished. "Oh, Violet, you mustn't." "Professor Lupin, there's a werewolf out there, and the Dementors, I'll come with you." "I'm the only one of us who can cast a Patronus, Hermione," Violet said. "And not even a very good one." if we get caught, or if the Dementors try and come for you. But then what will you do? Said Hermione, tears in her eyes again. How are you supposed to save Sirius if— I don't know, said Violet briskly, but I will. I have to. Sounding far more determined and confident than she felt, Violet stepped back outside and edged around the cabin. She could hear yelping in the distance, along with loud, angry squawks. Lupin must have run into Buckbeak at the edge of the forest. Sick with guilt and relief, Violet hurtled toward the lake. She raced across the grass toward the dark water, panting and nervous, and threw herself behind a bush at the very edge of the water. And then there were the Dementors. They were emerging out of the darkness from every direction, gliding around the edges of the lake. They were moving away from where Violet was hidden to the opposite bank. On the other side of the dark lake, two figures staggered to the edge of the water. Sirius collapsed to the ground, holding his head, moaning pitifully, and Harry appeared beside him, wand drawn and unharmed. He would be able to save Sirius now, she knew. He had to. But Violet watched, chilled to the bone, as her brother vainly tried to ward off 100 Dementors all by himself. Faint clouds of silver burst from his wand as he screamed, but he wasn't strong enough to fight them all off. One of them, larger than the others, was descending toward the crumpled figure of Sirius Black on the ground. Reaching out for him, Harry was on his knees, wand arm drooping. Harry, Violet cried in despair. She leapt from behind the bush and thrust out her wand. Expecto Patronum, she yelled, and Harry's voice matched hers from across the lake. And out of the ends of their wands burst, not a shapeless cloud of mist, but a pair of blinding, dazzling silver animals. Violet screwed up her eyes, trying to see what they were. They looked like horses, one large and strong, the other small and swift. They were galloping silently toward each other across the black surface of the lake, meeting in the middle where the swarm of Dementors was thickest. She saw them lower their heads and charge at the swarming Dementors. Now they were galloping around and around the black shapes on the ground, and the Dementors were falling back, scattering, retreating into the darkness. They were gone. The patronesses turned. One was cantering back toward Harry, while the other returned to Violet across the still surface of the water. They weren't horses. They weren't unicorns either. They were deer. A great stag with a pair of magnificent antlers and a slight and graceful doe, shining brightly as the moon above. The doe stopped on the bank in front of Violet. Her hooves made no mark on the soft ground as it stared at her with large, liquid silver eyes. Across the lake, the gleaming silver stag illuminated Harry's kneeling form, standing protectively over him. Prongs, Violet realized, staring at the points of its mighty antlers. She looked back to the doe in front of her. She reached out, her fingertips trembling as they stretched toward the creature, only for it to vanish before she could make contact. Violet stood there, breathing heavily. As the cloud of silver mist dissipated, she saw her brother slump to the ground across the lake. Instinct urged her to get to him, to somehow sprint across the surface of the lake, as the deer had done, and pull Harry into her arms to make sure that he was still breathing. But then she remembered the words of Hermione and Professor Dumbledore. You must not be seen. Violet quickly retreated back behind the bush, peering out at the other bank. A moment later, another dark shape was running across the grass. Professor Snape approached Harry and Sirius, both of whom were now laying still on the ground. He stood over Sirius's prone form, unmoving, his wand clenched in his fist. For a terrible moment, it looked as though he would leave Sirius there, or else do something worse, and then Violet watched him conjuring stretchers and lifting the limp forms of both Sirius and Harry onto them. Wand held out in front of him, he moved them away toward the castle. A gasp of relief left Violet's lungs. She slumped, falling to her hands and knees on the grass and trying to support herself on her shaking limbs. She had never cast a true patroness before, never really believed that she was capable of doing so. No happy memory had sprung to mind to fuel it. No powerful joy had come to her in her moment of need. There was only fear. Deep, true fear that she was about to lose the only people who had ever loved her. Violet whirled around at the sound of rapid footsteps approaching behind her. Hermione was running across the grounds and skid to a stop in front of her. "Did you do it?" she panted. "Is Sirius okay?" "He wasn't kissed," Violet said, her voice shaking as bad as the rest of her body. "He's going to be okay, Hermione. And Harry too, he's right over there. He wasn't bitten." Violet felt strangely giddy. She grinned, unable to suppress the strange swell of emotion, but Hermione was biting her lip. "Everything's going to be different now," she said nervously. "When we get back. Violet, you can never say anything about this, do you understand? But we've just changed the future. Nobody else will remember things the same way we do." "You mean we'll still remember everything from before?" Violet said, her smile dropping. "Sirius being soulless and Harry." Hermione shrugged helplessly. I don't know, Violet. I've never done anything like this before. How long until we have to go back?" Violet said, pushing herself back to her feet. "We've got about 45 minutes until Dumbledore locks the door to the hospital wing. We've got to get back inside before then, and before anyone realizes we're missing. And we can't be seen before then, can we?" Violet asked, wiping her hands on her pant legs. "I mean, if we just went back to the hospital wing now. If we went now, everybody would still be in there. You and me, Snape and Professor Dumbledore the Minister is there, and if you were to see us." "All right, so we'll hide," Violet said. "Come on, we can get inside the castle and hide in the same closet as before. Let's go." Together, looking carefully over their shoulders, and around every corner they came to, Violet and Hermione snuck into the entrance hall and crossed quickly to the same broom closet they'd waited in 2 hours before. It was cramped and awkward, and the sound of footsteps and voices rushing past outside kept them constantly on edge until finally, with a last glance at her watch, Hermione nodded that it was time to go. Peering carefully outside the door into the empty entrance hall, the two of them rushed up the stairs toward the hospital wing. Suddenly, Hermione grabbed Violet's sleeve and yanked her quickly into the shadows. There were footsteps and voices nearby. It sounded like Fudge and Snape. They were walking quickly along the corridor at the foot of the staircase. "Really remarkable turn of events," the minister was saying. "Never would have dreamed it. Profetti's going to have a field day with this. Dare say they'll want to interview you, Snape, for the tremendous part you've played in this. And once this mess has been sorted, I expect Sirius Black will consider himself to be quite in your debt." Violet frowned slightly as she caught a glimpse of Professor Snape's smirk as he and Fudge passed by her hiding place. Their footsteps died away. Violet and Hermione waited a few moments to make sure they'd really gone, then started to run as quietly as they could in the opposite direction. Up one staircase, then another, along a familiar corridor, and then the doors to the infirmary were closed. The girls froze as they opened. Dumbledore's back appeared. "I am going to lock you in," they heard him saying. "It is 5 minutes to midnight. Miss Granger, 3 turns should do it." "Good luck." Dumbledore backed out of the room, closed the door, and took out his wand to magically lock it. Panicked, Violet and Hermione ran forward. Dumbledore looked up, and a wide smile appeared under the long silver mustache. "Well," he said quietly. "We did it," said Violet breathlessly. "Sirius is all right. The Dementors didn't get to him, and Harry wasn't bitten." Dumbledore beamed at them. "Well done. I think," he listened intently for any sound within the hospital wing. "Yes, I think you've gone to get inside. I'll lock you in." The two of them slipped back inside the infirmary. It was empty except for Ron, who was still lying motionless in the end bed, Harry, who was sitting cross-legged in his bed, dressed in his clothes instead of the hospital pajamas, and what on earth? The curtain around Sirius's bed was no longer there. He was laying in bed, head raised, and a set of thick chains secured both his arms to the hospital bed, and he was staring right at Violet and Hermione with an expression of shock on his gaunt face.